All right. So today, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Okay. All right. So today we're going to be talking about Theodosius the First, also known as Theodosius the Great, who was a Roman emperor from 379 to 395 CE, and the last to rule over both the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire. He was a distinguished general fighting against and eventually creating treaties with barbarians, including the Visigoths, and he survived bloody civil wars. When serious illness threatened his life, Theodosius sought a baptism by the church. After his recovery, the emperor set about establishing Christianity as the religion of the state, vigorously suppressing paganism and a Christian heresy known as Arianism. Theodosius established the creed, reestablished, I should say, the creed, Nicene Creed, as the norm for all Christian orthodoxy, and also was connected to the General Second Council of Constantinople. Interestingly enough, Theodosius was excommunicated in 390 for the massacre in Thessalonica and only allowed back into the church after doing penance. This excommunication was historic as it showed the sheer power of the church, showed how much the church had gained, even if enforcing its will upon the emperor himself. As a result, of course, eventually he closed pagan temples and forbade their worship by threat of harsh punishment in 391 and 392. He forbade the private watching or observing, of paganism. Theodosius is very important. In fact, he founded a dynasty that continued in power until 450. But he was known for a lot more than that. In many ways, Theodosius stands at the bridge between the ancient world and the medieval world. You have this realm of the emperor, and then you have the realm of the church. And what's going to happen is church and state become very much one under Theodosius I. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go a little bit further than that. I want you to understand the complicated life of Theodosius from the words of his contemporaries. When I put this talk together, what I did, and I typically do this, is I start as a base the primary sources. So I literally stitched together the primary sources, Zosimus and the others, stitched it together, and then placed a layer on top of that of secondary sources, because sometimes I like to see the primary sources and what they think about him and that time, kind of capturing the zeitgeist of the era. I like to do that first, so the secondary sources don't necessarily inform my judgment. And so tonight you're going to hear a lot of primary sources. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, and a lot of times you're going, is he quoting from something? And I'll tell you what I'm quoting from, but I will be quoting from primary sources from that time. Who is Theodosius from the perspective of those living in the latter part of the 4th century? Another thing I want to bring up is that the relevancy of this. Well, the problem is, and it is a problem, and that is that when any kind of government, any form of governance merges together with a religion and the two become one, anything outside of that belief becomes the other. It becomes otherized, and as a result will eventually become persecuted. the emergence of church and state is not a good idea. And what's going to happen, you're going to go for this ride here, is you're going to see that what will happen once Christianity becomes the state religion, immediately it's going to hurt people who are of other beliefs, specifically those who have Greco-Roman beliefs. We can call it paganism. We'll go into that a little bit, what that means. And obviously it didn't mean much in those times. In fact, what they called those who practiced beliefs this kind, they called them Hellenes, as in Hellas, as in Greece. So this term was used frequently during the 4th century, and I will use that term quite a bit. So Hellenes, Hellenes, it will be used by outsiders. It will be used by insiders for those who we make the equation of being followers of a form of paganism. Pagani, of course, simply means those who are on the countryside, the last vestiges of those beliefs surviving in those areas. And again, another otherizing form. And eventually, of course, becomes a dominant form, but it's not how they knew themselves. So, hey, we learned something new already, right? How's that, huh? Hellenes. I like that sound too. It sounds good, doesn't it? All right. So what we're going to do is, the other thing I want to bring up before I jump into all this is I want to talk about the fact that I'm going to be telling you the story of exactly how this all happens. Now, that's going to be a complicated story. I'm going to go into the historical aspects, detail by detail, of what happens to the Hellenes, what happens to this belief system. Of course, it's not a belief system; it's a diversity of perspectives and viewpoints and everything else. I'm going to tell you the rise of Christianity, but we're going to go down a few other rabbit trails as well. But we still have to focus upon Theodosius. The other thing I want to bring up, one more thing as a qualifier, is there's so many characters here that you have to keep track. There's so many characters, and you're going, is this a talk of Theodosius or not? Theodosius is the main player, but there are other major players that are going on, and they all interact with each other. So hopefully I'll make it as clear as possible. So let's go ahead and get Theodosius born, right? Theodosius the first was born on January 11th, 347. He born in the Latin West during the reign of the Roman Emperor Constans, and of course also who was Roman Emperor at the time was his brother, of course, Constantius the First, but he was in charge of the East. In fact, at this point, the Roman Empire is already divided into two. So I'm going to have to explain this because this is going to happen a lot. I know we think of the Roman Empire and we think of it as united under one emperor. That changed. The Roman Empire was viewed by the end of the 3rd century as too big to manage, too large. And so an emperor by the name of Diocletian decided that what we're going to do is we're going to split up the Roman Empire into two halves. And so Diocletian took the eastern half, and so that was his area to manage. And he had his buddy Maximus take the western Latin half of the Roman Empire. So they were co-emperors. They also decided to have under them, each of them, a junior grade emperor, a little Caesar. And so, of course, you'll have under Diocletian, you'll have Galerius, and under Maximus or Maxentius, you are going to have eventually Constantius, who will be the father of Constantine the Great. So you already have this idea of a division. This is called a tetrarchy. Later on, the empire will be divided up. Constantine, of course, he comes to power, then he will be in charge of the Latin West, and a guy by the name of Licinius will be in charge of the Greek East. Again, that way, you can take care of everything. So if there's problems going on with the Persians or Parthians in the east, you can quickly mobilize that direction. The Eastern Emperor can do that. Meanwhile, in the West, there's an attack going on. That Roman Emperor can fight against the barbarians along the Rhine. So they can coordinate in a better way. Of course, what will happen is Constantine then will eventually become, after Licinius goes away, he'll become the one only emperor. Well, what will happen is another thing. I do have to explain this because otherwise nothing's going to make sense for this talk. What's going to happen is that Constantine then has three sons. He's like a basketball player. He names them all kind of after himself. So he has his son is one's called Constantius, another one's called Constantine, and the other is named Constans. Talking about redundancy in triplicate. And so what will happen is Constantius will be in charge of the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Constantine, that brother doesn't survive very long, and so Constans will take over the western Latin end. So you have these two emperors. The idea of having two emperors will continue all the way through to the time of Theodosius and beyond, even during the time of Theodosius. So you have to know this. I'm sorry. You have to understand that you got two emperors going on, one in the east and one in the west. There is an exception, and I'm going to go there right now. And the exception is after Constantius takes over everything, because Constans dies, then what will happen is when he dies, you'll have two emperors, two sole emperors in a row, and then after that, it'll be co-emperors after that. Got it? So anyway, so Theodosius is born during the time of Constans. Got that? The other thing I want to bring up is that the Roman world is experiencing, and this is, again, we have to talk about this, a belief system known as Arianism. So Christianity itself is not unified. You have two different beliefs. What will happen here is, as we know, Constantine the Great presided over the Council of Nicaea in 325. He did not make the decisions. By the way, he absolutely did not make the Roman Empire the official religion, Christianity. That is that's bogus. It's not true. There's no evidence for that. If you want to hear all about that, I did an earlier talk that goes on for hours just on that alone. So what will happen here is Constantine at Nicaea, they make this agreement. It's called the Nicene Creed to fight against Arianism. And so what is Arianism? I'll make it very brief because I don't want to go into this too deeply. What it is basically is they say that there was a time, so I should say it this way, because Jesus or Christ has a father, because he is the Son of God, therefore everybody knows that a father is before the son, and that there must be then a time when the son was not, just like when you can't have sons that are born before fathers, right? So this is the proverbial wisdom. So the idea is, if the son then comes after the father, the son then is less than the father, because he came about at a certain point in time. Therefore, he is limited. If he is limited, then he is not as powerful as the father, and then he must be an aspect of the father, but he is not the father. Therefore, as a result of that, the son is less than the father, and so therefore he is not fully God. And he must be human, maybe. Maybe he's just a vehicle for that. And so Arianism, as subscribed by, actually pronounced by a guy by the name of Arius, has nothing to do with Arian race. Arius is from Alexandria, great singer. He spreads his popular belief all over the place. Well, and so it's really, everybody's kind of into it, and it's not the theologians, not those people who are always rubbing their beards. No, it's a common people. It's a common clay. They're the ones all into it. So you can't even take a bath, they say, without the guy who's the masseuse saying, "Hey, is there a time when when the son was not?" And you can't go to the baker and the baker asking you, "Hey, so is uh, is Jesus just a creature of the Creator?" You just can't go anywhere. This is what the commoners are talking about. This is what they're interested. And so this belief system spreads everywhere. So the Nicene Creed is there to say, "Hey, no, 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 no. The idea is that the Father and the Son, they are of the same substance, homo, same, ousios, supposedly substance, uh, same substance." Well, of course, this is a whole other topic. They're the same substance. They are of each other. So that's great. That's wonderful. Well, what happens, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you're on, is that uh, the Council of Nicaea comes about. They make this agreement. And then about 2 to 3 years later, they all change their minds. A lot of them do. And Arius is recalled back from exile. And Constantine dies, and Constantius, his son, becomes a convinced Arian. So Arianism will be a big deal. It will be a belief system that later on Theodosius I is going to fight against. So yeah, I have to tell you this because it has to do with Theodosius. But that's a little backdrop there. Got it? Okay, so what will happen now, moving right along, is that it turns out that Arianism is so popular during the time of Constantius that the Nicene Creed becomes actually condemned. The Council of Sirmium, they actually have a council, and they condemn the Council of Nicaea, and the Roman world becomes Arian. Jerome himself says, "We all they declared Arianism. We thought good of ill men," and this is what happened. So yeah, the whole Roman world is rocking. So, well, as it turned out, while before Christianity was being persecuted by the Romans, especially under Diocletian, we're entering a period now where Christians are persecuting Christians. They're fighting each other constantly. So that's the focus. The focus is, and so the Arians win the day, and they start slaughtering people left and right. They also send missionaries out. They sent them out to all the way to the barbarians. And so the barbarians, the Goths and Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, they all convert over to an Arian form of Christianity. They don't convert over to Nicene Christianity. So, and that will continue all the way through until way later on when the Franks convert over to the Nicene faith. That's way later on. So that means that the barbarians, even when the Roman Empire converts back to Nicene Christianity, the barbarians will continue to be of the Arius brand of Christianity in their viewpoint. Okay, so this is what's happening here. So now we move on, and that is that let's continue. As for where Theodosius was born, this is contested. Zosimus and Hydatius says he was born in Cauca, Galicia in Hispania, while Marcellinus claims that he was born at Atelica, at Baetica in Hispania. So either way, Theodosius is from Spain. They're just fighting about the towns. His father was a certain Theodosius the Elder, who was a senior military officer. What happens is, of course, Theodosius I, he spent most of the reigns of Constantius, Julian, and Jovius living in Spain. Let's go to the first picture. While Christianity, especially Arian Christianity, now you know what that is, right? Thrived during the reign of Constantius. When Julian came to the throne, this is Julian in 361 CE, he not only reverted the entire empire back to observing Hellenistic polytheism, he made paganism the official state religion, and even issued various edicts curtailing the rights of Christianity. Wow. So Julian did end the supremacy of Arian Christianity, for he recalled back the Nicene bishops and other exiled under Constantius. He's thinking, this is going to cause a big mess. I want to bring this up briefly, and that is Julian is doing something very interesting. He's declaring paganism as the official religion. Now, of course, one may say that the state imperial religion was the official religion of the Roman Empire. So you could say he may be doing something, not doing something new, but he is doing something new, because what he's doing, he's dictating that a certain kind of belief of paganism, a belief that is held within the streets themselves amongst commoners, is now the prevalent belief. Where before, when it comes to the state imperial cult, yeah, it's kind of like it's like any public cult. It is not. It doesn't go all the way down to the grassroots level. This does, and so I'm being careful here. I'm saying Julian is already creating a precedent for the idea of having a state religion outside of that of the official imperial cult, which of course we acknowledge that was part of Augustus on. Does that make sense? So it is. I do have to bring that up, but there's chaos now. Let's go to the next image. Yet the next emperor, there he is. Yet when Jovian became emperor after Julian's death in 363, he nullified all edicts against Christians, issuing a decree ordering the toleration of all religions, and reestablished Christianity in a strong sense. But what he does is he goes, oh yeah, well, maybe I'm going to make now Christianity a state religion. Now, he doesn't make it officially in all its ways, but he still makes it the predominant religion. What he's doing is he's matching up what anything that Julian can do, I can do better. Okay, sorry. And so they're kind of matching each other. Now, he encouraged the Council of Nicaea being as the main form of theology to be followed, and he reversed the dominance of Arian Christianity. While paganism was at first tolerated, magic was not, and he issued edicts making sure any such practices were forbidden. What do you mean by magic? Is not good magic. It's called bad magic. It's the or dark magic. It's the magic to find out who's going to be the next ruler. Okay. Unfortunately, not long after his short reign began, Julian began to reverse himself concerning toleration of paganism, ordering on September 11th, 363 CE, that all worship of the ancestral gods was to be punishable by death. Wow. On December 23rd, 363, Jovian decreed that anyone who was found practicing any pagan ceremonies, whether in public or private, were also to be put to death. So, wow, it's pretty abrupt. So he's trying to match Julian. One of Jovian's very worst acts was his order to destroy the library of Antioch because of its association with paganism. Now, I know we hear all the time about the Library of Alexandria. How come we never hear about the Library of Antioch? Now, according to one story, he ordered his concubines to burn down the library. Yet this was also done, it was said, at the urging of his wife. That's what I get for going into the primary sources. You get all the nitty-gritty stuff that you're never going to hear from other scholars perusing through secondary sources. So concubines, wife, whatever. When the concubines burned the temple with all the books in it, they were laughing at this destruction, it was said. Meanwhile, the entire population of Antioch looked on with disgust. Johann Hahn, in his work Gewalt und religiöser Konflikt, relates that Jovian ordered the destruction of the Traianium, which Julian had converted to a library because he wanted to gain the favor of the Antiochians. However, he failed completely. Not only the pagans, but also the Christians interpreted this as a barbaric act, unquote. Let's go to the next image. The Great Library of Antioch was established in 221 BCE by the Seleucids and followed in function and design that of its rival, the Library of Alexandria. There's a lot of libraries out there. There's another major library, and that was the library at Pergamum. So it's a great way of competing. The museum in Antioch was reportedly on the lower slopes of Mount Silipus near the old city, but on the higher side of the colonnaded street. You can see that here. A description of this library survives in a report in Steinspring of the Vatican Codex. So here we go. So I'm going to read now from the Vatican Codex. And they constructed buildings of learning. Among these is a circular structure in the middle of which is a dome 100 cubits high. And in this is a reproduction of the heavens, including stars, signs of the zodiac, and horoscopes, with movements which have been worked out by the savants and completed by the Brahmins, who in the science of the heavens have reached the highest rank. So nothing moves in the real heavens without having its likeness reproduced. Sun, moon, and everything which is in heaven, unquote. It must have been an amazing display and possibly aspects that were mechanical in nature to make those complicated movements. Julian had greatly favored this library and expanded its pagan collection, taking the library of George, the Arian bishop of Alexandria, and adding that to it. He had been killed by a mob in Alexandria in 361 BCE, one of so many. Jovian's reign was also marked by a retreat from Mesopotamia in the face of Persian aggression. For while Julian had moved the frontier further east, he died in battle. And Jovian was forced the opposite direction, making a humiliating peace treaty with them that effectively gave them all Mesopotamia and Armenia. Heading back to Constantinople, he died under, how should I say this, suspicious circumstances. And so who is declared the next Roman emperor? This, of course, is going to be Valentinian I. So Valentinian the first will be the next Roman emperor, but there is a problem. Go to the next image. Valentinian doesn't want to reign alone. And so what happens is that, so he decides in the precedent of the past, he realizes the Roman Empire is too big. So he's going to split it in half once again. And so what's going to happen is he makes his brother Valens his co-emperor. I love this image here of the two together. Note the orb of the world there. Of course, it's a circle. The world was round. And you got, of course, the auspicious image above of the spirit of agreement. Right. So there you have that wonderful concord. So now Zosimus records the story why Valentinian selected his brother to become co-emperor. He says, I now have to state that while Valentinian was on his journey toward Constantinople, he was seized with a distemper, which increased his natural choleric temper to a degree of cruelty and even to madness, so that he falsely suspected his sickness to proceed from some charm or poison which Julian's friends had prepared for him through malice. So once again, magic, right? Accusations to that effect were drawn up against some distinguished persons, which set aside by the discretion of Sallustus, who was still prefect of the court. After his distemper abated, he proceeded from Nicaea to Constantinople. The army and his friends in that city advised him to choose an associate in the empire, that if occasion should require, he might have someone to assist him and prevent their again suffering, as at the death of Julian. So he complied with their advice, and after consideration selected his brother Valens, whom he thought most likely to prove faithful to him. And so he was declared as his associate. Let's go to the next image. And so it's divided there. So you could see the division there between East. You see right there, of course, Valens on one side, Valentinian on the other. Okay, so as for the division of the empire, affairs being thus disposed, Valentinian deemed it most prudent to place the East as far as Egypt, Bithynia, and Thrace under the care of his brother, and to take charge of Illyrica himself. The empire being thus divided, Valentinian began to govern more rigorously, correcting the faults of the magistrates. He was very severe in the collection of imposts, and particularly in observing that the soldiers were duly paid. You got to pay these soldiers. They got to, that's an important thing. Let's take a look at his image here. There we go. You're missing his nose, however. Well, there you have it. He also resolved likewise to institute some new laws. He began by prohibiting the nocturnal sacrifices, intending by that measure to restrain and prevent vicious actions. I have to tell you, emperors are paranoid people. They are always worried about magic overthrowing their ability to think clearly. And so, all sorts of things happen in the dark. And so he is stopping this. So this is another reason why various acts associated with paganism become more censored. Although, let's be honest, earlier emperors, even Julian Claudians, were paranoid of people practicing magic, especially if it's magic against them. So there you have that. He reigned from 364 to 375. He, by the way, he hated the well-dressed and educated and wealthy and well-born. He was very much an able soldier, a very good administrator. He took interest in the welfare of the humbler classes, from which his father had arisen. Unfortunately, of course, he did make a bad choice of ministers to be in charge, favoring, of course, those who are considered part of the rabble. Valentinian was married to Marina Severa before he came to the throne, with whom they had a son by the name of Gracian. You got to remember that. But then the emperor caught sight of Justina and fell for her. Let's go to the next image. Who is Justina? There she is. This is reputed to be an image of Justina. Socrates Scholasticus tells this story of the meeting. And yes, she's going to figure everything is going to be figured into the story of Theodosius. So I've got to put it all together, because later on we're going to meet Justina again and again and again. So let's find out who she is. And the person who talks about this story, his name is Socrates Scholasticus. I got to tell you, what a great name. If you want your kid to be too smart for himself, just name him Socrates Scholasticus. He will never live up to his name, or maybe he will. And that would be a great thing, wouldn't it? Okay. So he tells a story of his affair with Justina. I'm going to read it here. It's a very strange story. Justina, being thus bereft of her father, still continued as a virgin. Sometime after she became known to Severa, the wife of the Emperor Valentinian, and had frequent conversations with the empress, until their intimacy at length grew to such an extent that they were accustomed to bathe together. When Severa saw Justina in the bath, she was greatly struck with the beauty of the virgin, and spoke of her to the emperor, saying that the daughter of Justus was so lovely a creature and possessed of such symmetry of form that she herself, though a woman, was altogether charmed with her. The emperor, treasuring this description by his wife in his own mind, considered with himself how he could espouse Justina without repudiating Severa, as she had borne him Gracian, whom he had created Augustus a little while beforehand. He accordingly framed a law and caused it to be published throughout all the cities, by which any man was permitted to have two lawful wives. Unquote. From Socrates Scholasticus, which, by the way, is a 4th, 5th century historian. So, while this version of the story appears to support the belief that Valentinian favored having more than one wife, another version written by John of Nikiu had it that he divorced his wife because of an illegal transaction. This is as likewise as entertaining. He says, for this just and equitable emperor hated oppression and judged with the voice of justice and practiced equity. This great emperor did not spare even his wife, the Empress Marina. Now, she had bought a garden from a nursery woman. This is literally a female planter of plants, and had not paid her the price which was worth, because the valuers had valued it out of regard to the empress, and so had inclined to do her a favor. And when the pious Valentinian was appraised of what his wife had done, he sent God-fearing men to value that garden, and he bound them by a solemn oath to value it justly and equitably. And when the valuers came to that garden, they found that she had been guilty of a grave injustice and had given the woman but a small portion of the price. And when the emperor heard, he was wroth with the empress and removed her from the presence and drove her from the palace, and took to wife a woman by the name of Justina, with whom he lived all the rest of his days. As for his first wife, he drove and exiled her from the city and gave back the garden to the woman who sold it. So what is the true story? All we know is that when Valentinian did die in 375, he was buried directly next to his first wife in the Church of the Holy Apostles. And you're going, that's okay, great. You're telling these stories, so what? I mean, we're hearing these stories. Is there a meaning behind this? Well, I want to say his first wife, Marina Severa, will be the mom of Gracian, who will later on become an emperor of the Latin West. Also, here we go, he will also have a child with Justina, who will be Valentinian II, who will also be a Roman emperor, also of the Latin West. So Gracian and Valentinian I both ruling the Latin West. Who will be ruling the Greek East? Theodosius. You're going, oh, we do have to know this. Yes, you do. Sorry, you got to do your homework before we get to the big leagues. Got it? Yeah. So this is all important, and you're going to be running into her over and over again. So get ready. We just got to put together the backstory. That's the reality of it. You got to read a Silmarillion before you read Lord of the Rings. I don't know, maybe. Okay. So here, maybe you don't have to do that. I'm not telling you have to do that. So, read The Hobbit. No. Okay. So moving right along. Okay. So as for Valens, let's go to the next. I think the next image will be Valens. Yeah, there's Valens. Valens, who reigned the Eastern Roman Empire from 364 to 378, unlike his brother Valentinian I, he did ascribe to Arianism. Oh no, that's right. So you have one emperor, Valentinian I, who ascribes to Nicene Christianity, and the other emperor ascribes to Arianism. And so, once again, we have to get into this, because later on, Theodosius will ascribe to the Nicene Christianity, and he will fight those who are of Arian Christianity. So, once again, we have to know this. And so what happens is that the treaty Jovian made with Shapur II, remember him? The king of the Sasanian Empire, agreed to secede Mesopotamia and Armenia to the Persians. This, of course, made Valens, who now become emperor, pretty paranoid. He quickly moved east to Cappadocia to defend the eastern frontier. But while there, Procopius, Julian's maternal cousin, proclaimed himself emperor in Constantinople, and so Valens was forced to hurry back to defend his claim to the throne. At one point, situations were so desperate that Valens considered either quitting the throne or suicide. But eventually, he defeated Procopius, and Procopius was executed. So not a good beginning of his reign. And then arrives right in the middle of this. Oh, here we go. What's called the Great Conspiracy. Next image. The Great Conspiracy. Nice and blurred, but that's good. We'll keep it there for a while. What happens here is, it's called the Great Conspiracy. It occurred in 368 in a half of the empire ruled by Valentinian I. And we have Theodosius. He's back. Theodosius is now 21 years old. He accompanied his father to Britannia, watching him in action and learning much about the art of war in the process. What happened was a Roman garrison during the winter of 367, charged with guarding Hadrian's wall, decided to rebel, leaving Britannia open to invasion. And so the Picts from Caledonia began to flood into Roman territory. Yet at the very same time the Picts entered Britannia, the Scolti from Iberia and the Atticolti, and even the Saxons from Germania also landed along the western coast, making many Romans believe that this attack was prearranged and so constituted a very real plot, coordinated all together. All western and northern Britannia fell under their occupation, as the Picts, the Scolti, the Atticolti, and the Saxons sacked, say that 3 times fast, the great cities and raped and murdered much of the population. Many Roman intelligence agents were bribed by the barbarians, giving misinformation. Well, waiting until the winter weather calmed down. Next image. Theodosius the Elder crossed the channel to Reichborough, but left his troops in Bonia in order to gain intelligence, and found out that the Romans troops were either destroyed or had deserted, the latter for reasons often connected to lack of pay. Then, after learning what he needed to know, his troops landed and they marched to Londinium. Of course, this is Londinium, as a reconstruction is, making the city his main base of operations. And so what happens here is that he takes Londinium. Ammianus Marcellinus writes there he divided his troops into many parts and attacked the predatory bands of his enemies, which were ranging about and were laden with heavy packs, quickly routing those who were driving along prisoners and cattle. He wrested from them the booty which the wretched tribute-paying people had lost. And when all of this had been restored to them, except for a small part which allotted to the wearied soldiers, he entered the city, which had previously been plunged into the greatest difficulties, but had been restored more quickly than rescue could have expected, rejoicing as a celebration ovation. And so this really put Theodosius the Elder on the map, which of course will put Theodosius, his son, on the map. People are noticing. And so what happens? Next image. What happens is around 373, then, Theodosius, the son, now 26 years old, became governor of Upper Moesia. That's near the Danube there. You can see right there. Fighting against first the Sarmatians and then the Alemanni. The next year, in 374, Theodosius became the Dux Moesia, which means military commander. And so, wow. So son and father are moving up together, but then something happens. Next image. Something happens in ancient Mauritania. Now, I don't want you to get this confused with modern Mauritania, because it's a completely different location. People oftentimes do. So there you have it. So what happens here is Theodosius the Elder was then sent by Valentinian I to Mauritania, in order to depose a certain Romanus, the corrupt magistrate of Africa, and to quell a rebellion from a certain Firmus. He was the son of a Berber prince by the name of Nubul. In fact, the reason Firmus rose to prominence in the first place was due to his opposition to Romanus, who habitually refused to protect African cities that refused to bribe him. In fact, Firmus was proclaimed emperor. Firmus did oppose the Nicene Creed and often attacked places associated with Nicene Christianity. While Firmus attempted to compromise with Theodosius the Elder, hoping for some kind of peace, Theodosius refused and attacked him. The Berbers naturally backed Firmus, and while Theodosius fought him well, victory proved to be elusive until one of Firmus's own men betrayed him and so committed suicide. And you're thinking, okay, well, hey, the older Theodosius accomplished his mission. Well, now victorious, Theodosius the Elder thought he would be honored, but instead found himself arrested. Then he was actually put to death by Valentinian I. What had happened? Well, what happened is that many people were seeing that there was potential in Theodosians and Valentinian. The big thing is you kind of squash your competition, and so what happens is that, well, the elder of Theodosius is put to death. Next image. Also, by the way, at the same time, Theodosius lost 2 regions while fighting the Sarmatians. And so he ends up in Spain. So the question is Theodosius back in Spain because of his father, who didn't do anything except win, but probably because he's associated with factions that sought to maybe depose Valentinian I, or is he being is because of his own mistakes? But, well, guess what? Valentinian I dies in 375, and so now the Roman Empire in the Latin West fell to Valentinian II. Meanwhile, of course, Valens is still in charge of the East. Remember, Valentinian II is the son of Valentinian I. He's also the half brother of Gracian, who was elevated to the imperial throne when he was only 4 years old. Obviously, he's not 4 years old here, but so what are they going to do? You got a 4-year-old in charge of the Latin Western Roman Empire? Whatever shall we do? Well, wait a second. Remember the other brother, Gracian? He's the older brother from Valentinian the first wife. So what happens? They make an agreement, and the agreement is that Gracian and Valentinian II ruled the West together. So Gracian permitted Valentinian to govern Italy, parts of Illyricum, and North Africa, while he took in charge of Gaul and Hispania and Britannia. Let's take a look at Gracian. There's not a lot of good images left of Gracian. Yeah, there it is. Apparently, bad things happen later on. So there you go. Wow. So there you have it. Okay, so I want to say that I want to read this. So you'll see my face. I do have one. So what happens now? Okay, so Gracian comes to the throne, and he's sharing the throne in the West with Valentinian the second, right? Which is just this. I mean, this 4-year-old. So who's going to have a lot of power? Could it be Justina? You got it, the mom. So in a sense, the mom is ruling part of the Western Roman Empire through her son, because I don't think a 4-year-old could make the big decisions. So you do have, in a sense, at this point, female leadership. It also happens to be that she favors Arianism. She favors the Arian beliefs. So you can see where this is going to cause some problems. Aren't you glad we talked about her? So now you know who she is. Gracian, however, was his anger was very much against the traditional paganism or the Hellenes. And so we have a wonderful quote that I'm so happy that has survived from ancient times. It's from Zosimus, and it's a great example. I want to kind of break it through. Zosimus notes how much Gracian disdained many of the pagan traditions that came with the office of emperor, stating as follows. He says, this is Zosimus. He says, amongst the Romans, the persons who had the superintendence of sacred things were the pontifices, whom we may term as Gephyrae, if we translate the Latin word pontifices, which signifies bridge maker into the Greek. The origin of that appellation was this. Now, he's going to go ahead and he's going to tell a version of the story that you never hear about, the origins of the idea of Pontifex Maximus. And I just think it's interesting because, you know, he's kind of favoring more of a Greek interpretation of it. He says as follows. He says, the origin, at a period before mankind were acquainted with the mode of worshiping by statues, some images of the gods were first made in Thessaly. As there were not then any temples, for the use of them was likewise then unknown. Really? I don't know. They fixed up those figures of the gods on bridges over the river Peneus and called those who sacrificed to the gods Gephyrae, or priests of the bridge, from the place where the images were first erected. So he's giving this Greek origins for the idea of Pontifex Maximus. Hence the Romans, deriving it from the Greeks, called their own priests pontifices and enacted a law that kings, for the sake of dignity, should be considered of that number. The first of their kings who enjoyed this dignity was Numa Pompilius. After him, it was conferred not only upon the kings, but upon Octavianus and his successors in the Roman Empire. Well, Octavianus, of course, is Augustus Caesar. Upon the elevation of any one of the imperial dignity, he continues, pontifices brought him the priestly habit, and he was immediately styled Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest. Unquote. I'm going to say more in a few seconds. So basically, what makes a Roman emperor is three powers. Three powers. You can memorize this. A Roman emperor has the power of imperator. We get the word emperor from that. And so the idea is he is the commander-in-chief of the army. He has military power. That's number one. Number two power is the idea of princeps, or first citizen. The Roman emperor represents or embodies the will of the people before the Senate, before, there it is, and vice versa, the Senate to the people. And so this is the second one. It's very secular power. The third one is religious power. This is where you get the church and state connection, but it's through the imperial cult. And this power is called Pontifex Maximus. Pontifex Maximus, this power is very important. Because what happens is this, is that as you go through the first century, the idea of representing the people, the idea of princeps kind of gets a little flimsy because you're living under a dictatorship, right? And so Septimius Severus in the early 200s says, I'm not going to use this title that much. And so the focus now becomes imperator, which is the military power, or it becomes Pontifex Maximus. Well, as you know, during the third century, you have all these Roman emperors, and they're all being proclaimed as Roman emperors by their armies. And so everybody's imperator. So that term becomes less meaningful. And so what's the backup? Well, the backup is, wow, we must have religious power. Religious power is the highest power. So Roman emperors focus on Pontifex Maximus as holding these things together. We swear this. And so Diocletian, he will make himself big as Pontifex Maximus to go against the emperors, to go against religion. These are these ideas that come in about. Now, you have that context. Let's continue with the quote from Zosimus. He says, all former emperors indeed appeared gratified with the distinction and willingly adopted the title. Even Constantine himself, when he was emperor, accepted it, although he was seduced from the path of rectitude in regards to the sacral affairs and had embraced the Christian faith. In like manner did all who succeeded him to Valentinian and Valens. So they would declare themselves Pontifex Maximus. What's Gracian going to do? And this is important historically. Yes, it is. Don't worry. We're getting somewhere huge. Okay. What happens is, but when the pontifices, in the accustomed manner, brought the sacred robe to Gracian, I got an image of Augustus wearing the sacred robe. Let's look at that for a split second. The sacred robe, so you know what it looks like. There it is. He, considering that a garment unlawful for a Christian to use, rejected their offer. When the robe was restored to the priests who brought it, their chief is said to have made this observation: if the emperor refuses to become pontifex, we shall soon make one, unquote. Okay, I want to see my face, but thank you. That's great. Thank you, Margie, so much. So what's the so what? The curious point is that after Gracian was killed in 383, having rejected the role of Pontifex Maximus for the West, not the East, for the West, the Pope, Siricius, adopts the title in 384. 383, Gracian dies. I don't want the Pontifex Maximus. He's like a placeholder. As soon as he goes, 384, the Pope, the papacy takes it up, reviewing the transfer of this power from a Roman emperor to the Pope of Rome. And that's why the Pope is a pontiff. And he is a Pontifex Maximus. And we're looking at, wow, that does make a difference. That's all about East and West and understanding of even all the way up to 2024. Yes. See? I know you're going to just impress all your friends like you didn't even know when these things came about. Now, it doesn't mean the Pontifex Maximus title is not being used. Roman emperors were still using it. But what happened is because of the Gracian anomaly, it allowed, and then the absence of him, it allowed for a pope to snatch it. And it becomes, of course, eventually a stronger and stronger title. So there you have it. All right. So we're getting much in the way of takeaways here. Okay. So what happens now? The supposed reason for elevating Valentinian II to Italy and having Gracian further to the north was that many believed this land vulnerable to attack by the barbarians. And of course, obviously, and Valens fought the barbarians too, but he was too far east. So Gracian did the fighting in the west. That way he takes care of everything. So what happens now is that there's trouble. Of course, there's trouble, as you would expect. And here we go. So there's trouble rising from beyond the Ister River, that being from a new enemy known as the Huns, who are pushing against the Goths directly into the Roman frontier. And so, of course, as a result, the Huns invaded the area of Scythia, and those who reside along the Ister River. And the surviving Scythians were compelled to leave their habitations to these Huns. They crossed the river Ister to supplicate the emperor to receive them on their promise to adhere to him as faithful soldiers. The emperor, who permitted them to be received without their arms, he says, you can come, but don't have any weapons. And so a considerable number, therefore, crossed over the river, but with their arms through this negligence. And they arrived into Roman dominions and they quickly forgot both their petitions and their oaths. Thus, all of Thrace, Pannonia, and the whole country as far as Macedon and Thessaly were filled with barbarians who pillaged all their way. So we have a big mess here. Meanwhile, another figure which will figure into our conversation is Ambrose. Let's see Ambrose. Meanwhile, at this time, Ambrose became Bishop of Milan and ruled his realm with the iron fist from 374 to 367. For those considered friends, Ambrose was their champion, their personal hero, fighting the cause of the church with relentless courage and passion. But woe to those who were considered his enemies, for the very same drive that was such a creative force became potentially a destructive one as well. While the Roman Emperor Constantine did much to define church-state relations in the first half of the 4th century, it was the Bishop Ambrose who personally made the greatest contribution to these issues in the second half, and in many ways offset this delicate balance in favor of the church over the state. And of course, he's going to figure in a big way with Theodosius, because Ambrose was raised within the home of a government official and his own personal experience in politics early on in his career. Ambrose was savvy enough to be able to predict almost every conceivable political scenario possible, and intelligent enough to keep himself at least a few moves ahead of his opponents. Armed with this wealth of knowledge, the Bishop of Milan efficiently protected the autonomy of his church against any kind of encroachment by the state. He was also equally able to defend his positions on matter of faith against the will of the state. Furthermore, Ambrose had the confidence to take the offensive, changing agendas of the state through his sheer determination to the point where he could even bring an emperor to his knees. In fact, that's exactly what will eventually happen with Theodosius I later on. So we will see this. Originally from Trier and born around 340 CE, Ambrose was devoted to the Nicene cause. Ambrose was then appointed, actually, governor of Liguria, with his residence established in Milan. Let's go to the next image. This is one of my pictures of where this happened. When Auxentius, the Arian bishop of Milan, died in 374 CE, Valentinian I asked to appoint the successor by imperial decree, but he refused, stating that it must be decided by the people themselves. But when they gathered together in the basilica, Nicene followers and Arian alike, they began to fight one another. And so Ambrose was ordered to step in to calm the disorder, and was successful in doing so. As he addressed the now calm crowd, as the appointed governor of Liguria, an infant, according to Paulinus, cried out, "Ambrose, bishop!" Yeah, probably not quite that way, but anyway. And when the assembly heard it, they all instantly began to repeat the same. And by acclamation, Ambrose became Bishop of Milan. He's a state functionary. He's a governor. He's not a bishop. Well, it looks like politics and religion are coming together. Are you seeing this? Soon after, in 375, Valentinian I died, with the Western Roman Empire succeeded to his eldest son Gracian and his younger half-brother Valentinian II. Now Gracian, he was pro-Nicene. Valentinian II, through his mom, was pro-Arian. You guys got it? So when Gracian met Ambrose in Milan, the two instantly formed a very close alliance, sharing the same Nicene faith and both seeing one another as capable strategists. A few letters survive between the two of them, one written by Gracian begging Ambrose not to leave Milan before his arrival, saying he wanted to open up his heart to him for the entrance of the divine light. But because of their relationship, Gracian became less tolerant of those who practice a faith outside of the Nicene faith. and he gradually began to persecute those groups, Arians, and of course, pagans. And so here we go, next image. So when Ambrose began to attack paganism in general, Gracian reacted by removing the altar of victory from the Senate in 382. You're going to hear about this again. Now, this altar of victory, Octavian actually established the altar of victory in 29 BCE. It was meant to commemorate the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. So, excuse me. But the statue was originally captured even earlier in 272 during the Pyrrhic War and represented the goddess Nike, holding the palm branch and descending to present a laurel wreath. The Nicene Emperor Constans actually removed the altar of victory earlier, was reinstated by the pagan Emperor Julian. In addition, Gracian abolished the exemptions of the pagan priesthood, making them susceptible to taxation. After that, I want to stop there for a second. Let's see me again. So I want to say something. Now, what happens here, I'm going to back up a little bit, is that when Constantine, go back in time, Constantine, he becomes emperor. He and his co-emperor Licinius in the East, they put together what's called the Edict of Milan. And the Edict of Milan proclaimed religious freedom for everyone. For everyone. Okay, that's great. But also, it was very inclusive of not only paganism, but Christianity and Judaism and everything else. Eventually, this leads way to the idea that the pagan priesthood had always enjoyed tax exemption. They always didn't pay taxes, right? But what they did to make things fair is now Christian clergy also no longer pay taxes. This is the beginning of that, by the way. So churches don't pay taxes. Blame Constantine. But at the same time, pagan temples also, which of course fits, don't have to pay taxes either. So this is the way things work. So all the way up to this time, they're not paying taxes. Well, what's happening now, however, is that Gracian is now saying, well, Christian churches, they still don't pay taxes, but now the pagans will have to pay taxes. So already you're seeing the beginning, the shift against the Hellenes. And so also, the next image, let's take a look here. Actually, those hold off on the next image because I think I just noticed it's not there. So don't worry about it. So what happens now is after that, Gracian ended the rights of the Vestal virgins to receive gifts along with other pagan colleges. So there it is. Ambrose, of course, meanwhile, so Gracian is doing all this. So it's basically the Gracian Ambrose show. And they're working it out. But there's a problem because still in the Western half of the Roman Empire, you got Valentinian II with Mom, who are pro-Arian, and they have their own ideas, right? So what's going to happen? Well, Ambrose found opposition early on from Justina, who's the mother of Valentinian II, who was Arian in faith. Socrates Scholasticus says in Italy, Valentinian being still a minor, Probus, a man of dignity, had a chief administration of affair and was at that time prefect of the Praetorium. Justinian, the mother of the young prince, who entertained Arian sentiments as long as her husband lived, had been unable to stop the Homoousians, it's a Nicene people, but going to Milan while her son was still young, she manifested great hostility to Ambrose, the bishop, and commanded that he should be banished. So because, Gracian, he's the co-Roman emperor of the West further north, but Milan, where Ambrose happens to be in Valentinian II's area. No, complicated, right? Okay, so what happens? Meanwhile, what about for Theodosius. Meanwhile, back on the farm, yeah, Theodosius is still hanging out in Spain in retirement. Poor guy, right? He's grown his family. I think maybe he's enjoying himself. I'm hoping. He was married to Aelia Flacilia, and soon she gave birth to a son, Arcadius, who would someday become the Roman emperor of the Greek East. Honorius, his younger brother, and the future Roman emperor of the Latin West, would be born some years later. They also had a daughter named Pulcheria, but she died in childbirth. Unfortunately, his first wife also died soon after, around 386. So it's important to remember that Theodosius, I guess he wasn't enjoying life later on in Spain because his wife passed away. So he's single. There's a reason why I'm bringing that up. Don't worry. There's all these reasons. A little bit of Aelia of Flacilia. She was a firm supporter of the Nicene Christianity, and she called Gregory of Nyssa a leader of justice. It was very anti-Arian. So this, of course, will feed into Theodosius' own viewpoints. Meanwhile, of course, we do have to talk about this because here we go. The Goths are causing problems. The Goths, also known as the Scythians, continue to cause troubles, especially in the east. And so Valens, remember, he's the guy in the east, was forced to leave Persia and attack them along the Thracian frontier. He hastened from Antioch to Constantinople and from thence marched into Thrace against the fugitive Goths. Well, they actually came across a strange omen of a dead man that's laying in the middle of the road, and yet his eyes were open and they're looking around. They thought that may not be a good omen. I don't know. So the Emperor Valens perceived that the Goths were pillaging Thrace, resolved to send the troops after them, as well as the Saracens, who were part of his troops. The Saracens, by means of the swiftness of their horses, could easily escape whenever they perceived any considerable number approaching. The Saracens, with their spears, committed such savages upon the Scythians, these are Goths, that at length, despairing of success, they preferred passing the Ister and surrounding themselves to the Huns than being destroyed by the Saracens. But then what happened at this juncture, a certain Sebastianus arrived at Constantinople from the west. Although the emperor there, by reason of their youth, was unacquainted with the affairs and attended to the little besides the calamities of the eunuchs, upon hearing of his arrival, Valens, knowing his ability both in civil and military affairs, appointed him to the command of his army and entrusted him with the whole management of the war. Okay, so what happens here? Well, he took possession of several fortified towns for the security of his army. And from there, he did various surprise attacks against the barbarians. Sometimes when they were loaded up with spoils, he killed them and took what they carried. At other times, he destroyed them when they were intoxicated or washing themselves in the river. But soon events led to the fateful Battle of Adrianople. Let's go to the next image. Fateful Battle of Adrianople in 378, which, of course, ended with the complete defeat of the Emperor Valens and his entire army. Sebastianus sent a request to the emperor, desiring him to remain where he was and not advance, since it was not easy to bring such a multitude to a regular engagement. While he gave the emperor this counsel, his adversaries persuaded the emperor to march forward with his whole army, that the barbarians were almost destroyed and the emperor might gain a victory without trouble, was the belief. Their counsel, though it's not prudent, the barbarians resolutely opposed them and gained so complete a victory that they slew all of them except a few, with whom the emperor fled into an unfortified village. The barbarians therefore surrounded the place with a quantity of wood, which they set on fire. All who had fled thither, you can see it read a primary source, together with could never be found. The body of the emperor, of course, was lost. Valens is over. The Battle of Adrianople caused a big problem, obviously. In the east, looks like the Goths, in fact, the Goths have continued to attack the city of Constantinople itself. Who can possibly save us? Who can save us? Let's go to my face again. You know that guy in Spain, Theodosius, exiled, kind of living miserably, mourning the death of his wife. Well, guess what? They call him into service. Theodosius is called in. Gracian invited Theodosius to the command of the Illyrian army, and Valens, of course, lacked an heir, and then made Theodosius co-Augustus with Gracian and the sole emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Illyrian provinces were traditionally attached to the Latin West, so the fact that Gracian gave this region up to Theodosius is significant to how dire the crisis was perceived at the time. Why would Gracian do this? Well, he can't have little Valentinian II do it, right? He didn't trust anybody else. And you know what? I'm just going to go and say this. It was such a disaster afterwards. It didn't look like anybody's going to survive. So why not just throw Theodosius? He may not live. Meat grinder, he could, he might not. What did he have to lose? That's pretty much what happened. So meanwhile, as this is going on, Gracian ended the persecution of Nicene Christians in the Eastern Roman Empire, because, after all, his brother Valens was a practitioner of Arianism, and very quickly before Theodosius even got there, he declared the persecution against the Nicene Christians as over, although Theodosius himself was a Nicene Christian, and so it really shouldn't be quite that big a deal, but there you have it. And so we began with the reign. Zosimus talks about the reign of Theodosius I from Thessalonica. So let's go to the next image. We have an image of Thessalonica. It's a new Roman emperor during the stay of the new emperor Theodosius at Thessalonica. A great concourse arrived there from all parts, soliciting him on business, both public and private. And what happened, of course, is a great multitude of the Goths beyond the Isar and others had crossed the river and were infesting. They're said to infest the Roman dominions because of the Huns. And so what's going to happen is, well, he's got to fight them all back. Okay, end the image here. So a guy by the name of Julius was a superintendent. He's actually the superintendent of maintenance and education of the young children of the Goths that are brought in. He puts together a plan. I'm not going to go through the entire plan. I will just say, well, I'll say a little bit. So basically what happens is Julian discovered that the barbarians had plans. He wasn't sure what to do, so he decided not to tell Theodosius about what he wants to do. So he sends a secret letter, a private letter, to the various senators in Thessalonica. They meet privately and they make an agreement. He then, what he does after that is he sends a report to the barbarians under the name of Theodosius, even though Theodosius doesn't know about it, that the emperor intends to bestow on them considerable presents, both in money and in land, in order to bind them in gratitude to himself and the Roman people. Meanwhile, I don't know what Theodosius was doing. When they arrived, the soldiers, on the signal being made, mounted upon the roofs of the houses in the respective marketplaces in which they were stationed, and cast at the barbarians such number of darts and stones that they killed every one of them. I don't know, that's exactly a chivalric way of beating the bad guys, but there you have it. Meanwhile, the Emperor Theodosius resided there at Thessalonica. He was easy of access, says Zosimus, to all who wished to see him, having commenced his reign in luxury and in indolence. He threw the magistracy into disorder, increased the number of his military officers. He, it was said, introduced a vast expense of the imperial table. He constantly spent lots of money, had lots of parties, and according to Zosimus, impoverished himself. However, what's going on in a religious sense? As far as religious policies were concerned at the time, for the most part, Theodosius was tolerant towards pagans during the first part of his reign, at least from 378 to 383. Okay, and many pagans or Hellenes thrived during this era. For example, he made a pagan by the name of Tatinius prefect of Egypt. With that said, I warned you about this ahead of time. Theodosius was quite harsh on Christians who sought to convert back to paganism. Theodosius declared also that the ability and right of making wills shall be taken from those who turn from Christianity to paganism, and the testimony of such a one, if he made any, shall be abrogated after his death. That's according to his Codex Theodonius. But Theodosius does something else. He mandated that all Christians were to observe Sunday and Easter, in contrast to Saturday and the Sabbath of Judaism, as well as Passover. Now, we did have the Nicene Council. They did make a decision that one should should meet on Sundays, no longer on Saturdays. Yes, they talked about that. Also, Easter instead of Passover. But remember, what's happening here is the Nicene group lost, and you had Arianism and all these other forms of Christianity. So basically what's happening here is Theodosius is reaffirming a Nicene perspective on that. He says, on the Lord's Day, which is the first day of the week, on Christmas, and on days of the Epiphany, Easter, and Pentecost, inasmuch as when the white garments of Christians symbolizing the light of heavenly cleansing bear witness to the new light of holy baptism, at the time also the suffering of the apostles, the example for all Christians, the pleasure of the theaters and games are to be kept from the people in all cities, and all the thoughts of Christians and believers are to be occupied with the worship of God. Wait, huh? What? The pleasure of the theater and games are to be kept from the people in all the cities. It doesn't say just Christians. See how it works? It works in increments. It's not good for the Christians, so therefore, it's not good for anybody else. See, this monolithic mindset is beginning. Now all of a sudden, it's like we're not even Christians. There's nothing on Sundays. No games. No plays. What are you doing? See it? Slowly but surely, it's creeping in. And if any are kept from that worship through the madness of Jewish impiety, or the error and insanity of foolish paganism, it's a quote from him, let them know that there is one time for prayer and another time for pleasure. But who is he now to dictate what others do? Yes, Constantine earlier said, yeah, Sundays is a day of relaxing, enjoying, and you may pray to whatever God or whoever is in heaven. You can do all that. Just make sure you pray for the safety of the Roman emperors. What's happening here, however, is that Theodosius is changing traditional weekend rules and no pleasure on Sundays. Maybe hoping that how boring Sundays are, people convert to Christianity because something's going on. I don't know. Okay. Theodosius also tried best to uproot the spread of Manichaeism. He says, whenever there's found a meeting of a mob of Manichaeans, let the leaders be punished with a heavy fine, and let those who attended to be known as infamous and dishonored, and be shut out from the association with men, and let the house and the dwellings where the profane doctrine was taught be seized by the officers of the day. So the Manichaeism is out. Meanwhile, Theodosius is spending too much money, and his expenses are way too high. So, what do you do when you spend too much money? Yeah, you raise taxes. So, guess who's going to raise taxes? That's right. Theodosius is going to raise taxes. And of course, the army became weak, he says Zosimus, and all the cities were likewise drained of money, partly by the excessive imports and partly by the rapacity of the magistrates. It's in fact the inhabitants of the towns lived in misery through their own poverty and the iniquity of the magistrates, their own resources being um, to entreat the gods to deliver them from such afflictions. For hitherto they were permitted to enter the temples and to worship the gods in the manner of their country. So what's going to happen now is that people are praying to the gods, these people who are not Christians. Please let this end. Meanwhile, during this same time, you have a new bishop of Rome. His name is Damasus. Let's go to the next image. I guess we won't have it for too long, but it's a medieval image of him. Thank you, Margie. Damasus appropriated the episcopal see of Rome. The city, by the way, was divided amongst various factions with violence in the streets. What's going on in Rome? What happened is as follows. The story follows that when the Emperor Constantius temporarily exiled his predecessor, Liberius, that being, of course, another bishop of Rome by the name of Felix II, was put in his place in 355. Then when Liberius was brought back to be bishop of Rome, either for compromising with the Arian party or becoming temporarily part of it, the idea was that he and Felix would rule together. So there would be two popes, Felix and Liberius. But Felix died before that could happen, leaving two factions behind. The Liberius faction, who then supported a certain Ursinius as the next in succession, and the Felix faction, believing Damasus should be now head of the church instead. Ursinius was part of the Arian party, originally from Milan, according to Ambrose, while Damasus championed the Nicene cause, according to Jerome and Rufinus. So there was as a result, you have these two factions in Rome supporting two different popes, one Arian and one Nicene, and it starts a 3-day riot. I want to pause for a second. I want you to think about this. Wait, this is 355. Christianity has been legalized, since 313, and they've been out there, and they've already broken up into various factions, and they're already at each other's throats, and it's all about politics. It's not about, it's about, anyway, sorry. I just had to make that pause, but it tells you a lot. So you got a 3-day riot in Rome. The city prefects were called upon to intervene and found themselves on the defensive. Then a massacre soon ensued. In fact, 137 were butchered in the Basilica of Synesius. This is where the present day, the Basilica of Santa Maria de Maggiore is located today, obviously. Blame fell upon the Felix faction, and so Ursinius was exiled to Gaul. Yet Damasus was also personally accused of murder. You got a bishop of Rome, pope, who murders. That greatly injured his reputation. The conflict between the two parties lasts, but soon Damasus will be declared as the true bishop of Rome. Wow, okay. This is, of course, during the time of Theodosius, and of course, in the West, Valentinian II and Gracian. Now, what happens is, what does he do? Well, becomes a close ally with Ambrose of Milan, to champion Nicene orthodoxy. But Damasus does something that is going to be damaging. And I'm sorry. And he's of the Nicene group, and he'll be supported by Ambrose, and he will be supported by Theodosius. And why am I bringing this up? I know you're going to have the so what. I'm going to give you a big, 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 big so what, because you're hearing all these little intricate stories. And you're thinking, how does that affect history today? And all of a sudden you're going, oh, okay, wow, that really affected history. This is another one. You ready to go down this rabbit trail? Okay, so here we go. There is a difference between Greek and Latin. Okay, I said it. A guy by the name of Tertullian, he's trying to define the Trinity, and he defines it as tres personae una substantia. Three persons, one substance. Got it? In this, right? Three persons, one substance, and part of Nicene ideas. As for the equivalent of this formula in Greek, this is a matter of extreme controversy. You see, what happens is the Latins have their own idea of what Greek word should apply to this formula. However, Greeks have their own idea. And so what happens is the persona, they match the Latin persona, they match with the word. So the idea of three persons, they match it with the word hypostasis. Hypostasis. Okay, so hypostasis is part of that. Okay, so wait, three hypostasis. Well, so who cares? What's the big deal about that one? Hypostasis in Greek is used in many ways. It's the same derivative as the word hypocrite. Is the same derivative of the word where they use in Greek theater these gigantic masks. So it's a persona, but it's a persona as in a facade. See where we're going with this one already? So while the Latins are thinking, this is persons, so far the Greeks are hearing masks. And then in substance, they don't use, in Greek, they use the word to Latin substance. In Greek, they use the word ousia. Ousia means intrinsic reality or essence. That really supports the idea of oneness. It's not a general term like substance in Latin. It's a very specific intrinsic reality. So while the Latins are going, it's just, so God, basically it works this way. It's like three persons, one substance. That makes sense theologically. It does. I don't necessarily agree or disagree. It just makes sense. But you're telling what the Greek is hearing is going, you see, God is actually just one intrinsic reality with three masks. I'm God the Father today. I'm God the Son. I'm God the Spirit. You know what they say? Right? Heresy, right? So guess what happens? This ridiculous Damasus mandates that the Greek understanding of those words in Latin is the official way. The arrogance of this man who is a Latin from the West, telling the Greeks what their own language should be. Why is this important? Because what happens is the Greeks have a choice. They have a choice to either change the meaning of their own words, which some do. Others refuse to change the meaning of their own words, and it starts to break this connection between East and West. This intrinsic East and West aspect where Damasus is trying to have dominance over the East, to the point where eventually fighting over these words will connect later on to a council known as Ephesus and a council of Chalcedon, at which point a large portion of the Roman Empire in the East refuses to go along with this game anymore of these popes dictating their own self, dictating their own the theology for Greek listeners. And as a result of that, they refuse to listen. They go in rebellion. And so the Roman authorities, who are pro-Nicene, like Justinian will attack them to the point where they don't want to be a part of this anymore. And then when the Muslims arrive, they go, we would rather be under you guys than under the Roman Empire. And they open their gates, many of them, they rather be Monophysites. They'd be rather, you get my point, right? They'd rather be under the Muslims than under the persecution. And yes, that is why these areas go under Islam. Egypt, Syria, Palestine. So is that a so what? That's a so what. So one thing leads to another, leads to another. It's a big picture time. All because starting off, Damasus trips it off. Does that make sense? It's all about arrogance. Okay, let's see. I don't like this guy. No, I don't like him. No, he's not a good guy. Well, okay, so moving right along. So he also, of course, does a power grab with Illyricum. He points his own vicar, apostate, and kind of grabs that. And so, but he is another pro person who's supporting Nicene. You know, I'm not anti-Nicene. I'm just saying Damasus is not a good guy. You know, we'll see about Ambrose in a little bit. But let's go here, because now what happens is that on Damasus keeps pushing the fact that he needs to be obeyed. And on February 20th, 380, Theodosius I issued an official proclamation that the religion of the Senate will be that as taught by the Peter in Rome, and of which Damasus was a successor. And so what he does, the emperor empowered the papacy and validated his line through the St. Peter. And so Theodosius I does this. So what's happening now is that he's empowering the Pope in the West and giving him authority in relation to the Senate. So we're seeing, I'm following through with my promise in this talk. I'm telling you exactly, piece by piece, how this is all happening. Meanwhile, Damasus is close to another person by the name of Jerome. He writes him a letter encouraging him to put together a new Bible. That Bible, of course, will be the Latin Vulgate. And so the Bible is then translated from Greek into Latin and eventually becomes the official Bible of the West, of Catholicism. And so that's what happens there. Damasus also is the first to establish the Vatican archives. Meanwhile, at the same time as this is happening in the West, there's stuff going on, of course, in the East. All right, so here we go. So as before, Theodosius I got a hold of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was under Valens, and Valens, of course, was pro-Arian, and so Arianism really had a very strong hold there in that region. And Constantinople was the center of Arian Christianity. It was the very center of it. So what happens is during this period of time, there were people who resisted, and there are three people who orchestrated resistance that eventually won the day for the Nicene cause against Arianism, and they're known as the three Cappadocians. The three Cappadocians is Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus. Now, Basil the Great, what he does is he creates, as a bishop, he creates an infrastructure that makes the common people favor Nicene Christianity. What does he do? He opens up in different places what's called a basiliad. A basiliad basically is you arrive in town and you don't know what to do. And the basiliad is a place where you get free job training. If you want, and there's people there who volunteer the time to train you in different kinds of jobs. Do you want to be, a metallurgist? Do you want to be a potter? They give as a tithe their own time to train you in these various trades and arts. Or if you're sick, This Basiliad is a hospital, and physicians are there, and as they're tithe, they're there free. They're there to give free medical care to whoever is sick. So the Basiliad is used for that. And finally, number 3, if you're hungry, the Basiliad is a place that feeds the poor. Genius idea. So Basil opens this up, and all of a sudden the commoners are going, hey, hey, hote hote uking, as you say in Greek. Is there a time when he was not? What happens is the Basiliad converts people over. It's like, you know what? I like Nicene people. My tummy is full. I like Nicene people because I'm better. I like Nicene Christianity because I got a job. You get to see the point. So what happens? Basil the Great creates that infrastructure. It converts people slowly over. Then you got Gregory of Nyssa, and what he does is he is a brother of Basil the Great. He creates a theology that defeats Arianism. And what he basically says is, I'll give in summation, is that you can't have the son being less than the father, because therefore the father needs to have something less than himself to create the world. And so therefore you're making the father less as well. So he has to be co-equal in order for that authority to have the authority to create the world and not have it deficient in any way. Does that make sense? And God cannot be deficient in any way, yada, yada. And he uses, this is great, Middle Platonism to support his views. Now, I want to go off here just for a few seconds. What's happening is Christians, even since the beginning, many of them are Platonists, especially Justin Martyr and the others, Clement of Alexandria, Origen. They're what happens now is that the Middle Platonists, I'm sorry, they're Neoplatonists. Middle Platonism becomes respectable, and Numinus, actually, who is a Middle Platonist, he defines the idea of essence. He defines certain ideas that will be later on used at the Council of Nicaea. That is Middle Platonism being used. And now you have Gregory of Nyssa using what we call new Neoplatonism, and this makes Platonism respectable. So what happens is that a lot of people who are Hellene or pagan, who are Platonists, go, hey, we can rationalize and become Christians and still be Platonists at the same time. That's what happens to the intellectual order. So a lot of people say they're Christians and they're actually Neoplatonists. And this is one of the ways the elite, the more educated types, were able to survive through this transfer over from paganism to Christianity. Does that make sense? And Gregory of Nyssa is a great example of using these ideas for Christianity, but applies concepts from Plato, from Pythagoras, from Middle Platonists, of course, obviously, and from many Numinous specifically, and then onwards and so forth. Is this helpful? So what happens is that these ideas do defeat Arianism. So they'll see that this Platonic idea, Platonism, can win the day for God. See how it works? So there's a problem. Basil the Great, he's a great administrator. He's not that great a speaker or writer. Gregory of Nyssa, he's a great theologian, and he just doesn't like people. He likes to spend his time in nature, listening to burbling brooks. He talks about leaves and trees, and he's very much into the presence of Mary, epiphanies, that Mary appears and so forth, and he's very close to his sister, who's also a mystic as well as a Platonist, Macrinus. So interestingly enough, we don't talk about that fourth Cappadocian. So what's going to happen is that Basil has a buddy by the name of Gregory of Nazianzus. He is a master of oratory. So he uses the infrastructure of Basil the Great. He uses the theology of Gregory of Nyssa, and he just goes straight. He goes straight to Constantinople, and he opens up a church and starts preaching like crazy. Of course, the patriarch was a certain Demophilius, who is, of course, a Demophilius, lover of the people. Great name. My name is Demophilius. You love people? Apparently you do. He is a patriarch of Constantinople. So Gregory of Nazianzus, he arrives in Constantinople. He founds this humble church um, of like-minded individuals who believed in the Nicene Creed in this little house, in fact. So, so basically, he uses gifts of oration. He starts preaching. Came in handy since immediately everybody wanted to know, what he's saying. He's a magnificent preacher. As he preached, his small house of prayer began to outgrow its confining walls, and gradually the church began to expand. According to the ancient church historian Sozomen, this church subsequently, quote, became one of the most conspicuous in the city, not only for the beauty and number of its structures plural, but also for the advantages accruing to it from the visible manifestations of God, says Zosimus. He says, for the power of God, he says, was there manifested and was helpful, both in waking visions and dreams, often for the relief of many diseases, and for those afflicted by some sudden transmutation in their affairs. The power was accredited to Mary, the mother of God, the Holy Virgin, for she does manifest herself in this way. The name Anastasia was given to the church because, as I believe he says, the Nicene doctrines, which have fallen into disuse in Constantinople, and so to speak, buried by reason of the power of the heterodox, arose from the dead, or again quickened through the discourse of Gregory. Or, as I have heard, some affirm with assurance that one day, when the people were met together for worship in this edifice, a pregnant woman fell from the highest gallery and was found dead on the spot. But that at the prayer of the whole congregation, she was restored to life, and she and the infant were saved. On account of this occurrence of this divine marvel, the place, as some assert, obtained its name. What in the world is going on? You got this mega church, right? Always, and of course, they mention the speaking of tongues and prophecy. It's a very strange, interesting time of the miraculous. What's going on? Did you catch it? You see, the three Cappadocians, they are from Asia Minor, and they were connected to and inspired by their family, a guy named Gregory the miracle worker, who was the first reported person in Christianity to mention an epiphany of Mary. And Mary appeared with John. However, what's going to happen is Mary, within the indigenous Anatolian context, will take on aspects of indigenous beliefs and powers, and will have those indigenous beliefs ascribed by the Cappadocians. And so that's why it's attributed to her power. Are we seeing where we're going with this one? This is absolutely 100% the origins of the cult of the Virgin Mary. This is where it comes from. It started right here in 380 at Constantinople with Gregory of Nazianzus. And I think, last I checked, that's kind of an important idea. What do you think? And under the auspices of who? Who's protecting all this? Theodosius the First. He's supporting Nicene. So you see how Theodosius is very important for so many things that we understand today, but we have to take the time to understand the information to get there. That's why we have to know the details. You can't do, I know you're going, this talk is so detailed. Yes, because you cannot ever do it by just saying generalities. That's why I'm reading the primary sources and you hear it from them as opposed to me. I read their words, not my words. Is that helpful? Is this interesting? So what's going to happen, as you can see, is the cult of the Virgin Mary will then grow like crazy after this point, and will, of course, obviously connect to the city of Ephesus and combine with Artemis of the Ephesians in one direction. The cult of the Virgin Mary will go the other direction. And then that means that the Council of Ephesus, right? And, and so what happens to the Council of Ephesus in 431, it would declare Mary as Mother of God. And at that moment, she takes on the aspects of Artemis of the Ephesians in many ways, taking on some of the same titles. And then at that moment, it hits the West and they create the Church of Santa Maria de Maggiore that embraces the idea of this church council, and then the Mary Virgin Mary cult spreads to the Latin West from there. Does that make sense? So this is where it all starts. This is where it all begins. Whew. So what about Demophilius? Well, what happens is he finds himself outside the walls. And how does this work? Well, here we go. See, what happens, the long and the short of it, is that Theodosius I removes Demophilius from his position as Patriarch of Constantinople in 380 CE. Well, who's going to be the next? Oh, Gregory of Nazianzus. Oh, yeah, makes sense. Got it. Right. And guess what? Oh, they're going to have a church council there in 381, the Second Ecumenical Council at Constantinople. Will they officially reestablish the Nicene Creed? Arianism is out, and Gregory of Nazianzus presides over. Does that make sense? So all these ideas are pivotal. He also declares against the Pneuma Matamaki, fighters against the Spirit, because there's another group that says that the Holy Spirit is less than the Father and the Son, and so that's outed. And they also make sure that the creed adds not just Father and Son, but Holy Spirit, so that all three are recognized. Does that make sense? So that's what happens. Meanwhile, further on, Theodosius. I think we just kind of crossed over. Oh, let's look at some pictures. I don't know what I'm doing. There you go. Let's look at a few pictures here. I love this. First of all, the first one I'll show you is it's a codex. This is part of the Jerome's Latin Vulgate, early page. That's kind of cool. Next image. There's the three Cappadocians. One interesting thing I want to tell you is that you're going to find the image of at least two of them, but sometimes all three, within the majority of Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox churches today. They are the fathers, they're the founders in many ways, or refounders of the Eastern Church. They're really pivotal. So if you come from an Orthodox tradition, you're probably celebrating right now. Finally, somebody's talking about your beliefs. Moving on to the next image. And there's old Constantinople where all this happened. Pretty cool looking, huh? Yeah. So I want to make sure that you saw that. All right. Thank you. Put it on down there. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, Theodosius. So Theodosius was devoted to the Nicene cause and moved against, obviously, Arianism. He also signed a treaty with the Goths in 382. And so observing, hoping that there will be some kind of agreement between the two. In fact, he had this brilliant idea, which probably wasn't that brilliant, and that is to have some of these Goths serve in their military. So let's go to the next image. So I'm reading the primary source here. This is from Zosimus. So what happened is that he therefore judged it most prudent to place some of them amongst the legions that were in Egypt and to supply their place in his army with a detachment thence. But the conduct of the barbarians was very turbulent. And go to the next image. And they disposed of all in the various markets at their pleasure. When both met in Philadelphia, a city of Lydia, the Egyptians were attentive to the orders of their officers, while the barbarians, who exceeded them in number, this is obviously Philadelphia, were regardless of all commands. A tradesperson in the marketplace demanded money for goods that he had sold to a barbarian. The barbarian drew his sword and wounded him. Upon this, the man cried out, and another was then wounded, who ran and assisted him. The Egyptians were grieved at the sight of this evil action. Eventually, there's a full-on riot, and as a result, they attacked them, killed more than 200, wounded some, and compelled many of them to take refuge in the sewers, where they did. Okay, so what happens now is more revolts, more Goths causing problems, as you can imagine. As far as Theodosius, he's starting to fall apart. In fact, what happens is that he starts to place all human happiness in various pursuits. He encouraged mimics and dancers and played dissolute and lascivious music. Ooh. And so, yeah, he's starting to kind of, he's losing a little bit during all these turmoils. But then, of course, you're going to have more problems. Kind of want to skip a few sections here. But let's get to Gracian. So Gracian, things are not turning very well with Gracian. You see, there's going to be another revolt in the West. I know. I'm sorry. Things in the West aren't very great either. So, as you know, in the Eastern Roman Empire, we talked about this division earlier, Theodosius I is in charge. In the West, of course, you have in the southern part of the Western Roman Empire, you have, of course, my brain is dying quickly. Whatever starts with the V. My brain just died. And then, of course, you have Gracian, right? And so, Valentinian. Thank you. I don't know. My own mind just says, "Hey, it's Valentinian." Okay, so you got Valentinian II in the southern part. You got Gracian in the northern part, and all of a sudden, you get another guy that rises up, and his name is Maximus. And now we get to this next image. So here's Maximus, and Maximus is thinking to himself, you know what? If Theodosius, who is just like a common guy, can be raised up to a high platform, why can't I? Right? I mean, so he now wants to have the power. And so he starts a big revolt. Let's go to the next. And so, yeah, there you go. So Magnus Maximus is now fighting against Gracian. And you can see what's going to happen is Gracian will fight Maximus, and Gracian will lose. As a result, now Magnus Maximus is in charge of the northern section of the Western Roman Empire, while you still have nominally Valentinian II, who's really his mom, is in charge in the southern part. Basically, it's a big mess. And then what happens is that Maximus then plays a game. So he said, so Valentinian II, let's just see my face, I'll just talk. Valentinian II wanted to make things right. And so Maximus, they had an agreement beforehand, temporary truce. He wants to renew that truce. And so Maximus says, sure, let's go ahead and meet. And he's very nice to the representatives, the embassy, and says, yeah, nothing to worry about. We're still friends. The embassy then crosses over the Alps, feeling this is a great situation, all is well. And you, as an emperor, you never relax. And so what happened is, you can see what's going to happen, is that Valentinian was forced to not only recognize it, but what's going to happen is eventually is that he's going to be chased, and he's going to run, and he's going to flee with mom, and they're going to flee back to Theodosius for help. So that's basically what's going to happen. I summarized a whole bunch of pages in just a few words. How's that? All right. So meanwhile, now that Maximus has to be recognized as an emperor, what's going to happen is that he interrupts things. You see, at this point, what happens is that Theodosius, he's going to start moving against paganism. You know, he's defeated the Arians, as you see. He's going to start moving against paganism. And then he gets word that Maximus is supportive of pagans and doesn't have a lot of problems with them. And so now all of a sudden he reopens up the temples because he wants to have some kind of agreement and some, with Maximus. And so temples that were closed down were suddenly reopened. And again, pagans were now being tolerated temporarily again, just when he thought he is going to take that next step. And so you're going to have various prominent pagans during this time. One is a certain Vettius Agorias Practitius, I love that name, who was renowned for his virtuous life. And when he died, so many Romans mourned his death that it was just like the whole town came out. A man of letters. Of course, Jerome wrote in 397 saying basically he is now suffering in hell. So you basically have this intolerance going out there. There's also a guy by the name of Symmachus, the guy who opposed the removal of the altar, or the altar of victory, and we also have him. And but Symmachus now is allowed to thrive. He again is a very important person in Rome. In fact, he was an urban prefect in 384. He is well known for his advocacy to preserve the ancient religious traditions of the city, as well as the people. And so with this political change, because Maximus is creating a new atmosphere of tolerance, at least sort of, and Theodosius has to play good. As a result of that, there was this appeal to Valentinian II, who is still kind of hiding away. He's going to eventually run for help to Theodosius, but still, he is still in the area of Rome, but he's losing lots of territory. There's appeal to him to return this altar victory back to the Senate building, and to give money back to the Vestal Virgins, and to make the priesthood taxes exempt. So you're seeing here the pendulum is going the other way again. And so what happened is appointed the head of the embassy sent to Valentinian the second by the Senate. Symmachus basically is presented the following speech before the emperor himself. And it's such a great speech to say, can't we all just get along? I do want to read it. This is the speech that Symmachus says. He says, "We ask peace for our native indigenous gods. We cultivate the same soil. We are one in thought. We behold the same stars, the same heaven, the same world surrounds us. Why should not each, according to his own prudence, seek the truth? The great mystery cannot be approached by one road. The divine mind distributed various cults and guardians in the cities as various spirits in youth, so that the fatal genii are divided amongst the nations. Utility should decide what gods of man should be. Since all reason is in darkness, what is better than the recognition of the divinities should be decided by the memory and example of the fortunate times. If great age gives authority to religion, such a faith is to be preserved for all ages, and our fathers who happily follow their fathers are to be followed by us. I do not plead merely the cause of Roman religion. From these recent crimes have come all the misfortunes of the Roman people." He's referring to the legislations of Gracian, the Roman people. "The law of our fathers honored the Vestal Virgins and the ministers of the gods with the necessities of life and just privileges. All these are now diverted to degenerate money changers. Following this came the public famine, and a blighted harvest deceived the hopes of all the provinces. Here are all the misfortunes of the earth. Let us charge nothing to the stars. The year becomes one of drought through sacrilege, for it was necessary that all things denied to religion should perish," unquote. So he's saying basically there's signs and omens that nature is listening, and it's favorable towards the idea of toleration, not, of course, attacking one another, because after all, we are all under the same stars. Our feet are planted upon the same earth. We breathe, I'm adding to it, the same air. Shouldn't we just get along, right? Well, the speech greatly moved the court of Valentinian II and those present, mostly Arian in faith, and leaned in favor of restoring the altar of victory to the Senate. But the tide changed after Ambrose responded to Symmachus, stating that if the Romans were preserved by the gods in the wars with Hannibal, why were the hostages taken? All men serve the emperor and he serves God, but he who would be loyal to the true God must have no indulgence for the gods that are demons. Idols must be burned and profane ceremonies abolished. To restore the altar of victory would be a persecution of Christianity, and the emperor would thereby become an apostate. Unquote. What? Wait, how? Does this sound familiar? Probably a little too familiar. Christians are being persecuted because the altar of victory is there. We can't have that. Why? It's part of your tradition. You see, I know, I'm going through all these details, and you're finding maybe a little too many things familiar along the way about how things are going along, but let's keep on going. You're seeing how this all is put together. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this, a baby is born. Honorius, the younger brother of Arcadius and the future Roman emperor of the Latin West, is born on September 9th, 384. Congratulations. In 384, Damasus also dies. Remember that pope? Actually, but I want to say something. I call him a pope, but nobody called themselves a pope at that time. What? No. But when he died, Sirius was elevated to be in charge of the pontificate from 384 to 399. Sirius sounds like a Harry Potter, doesn't it? Sirius is the first bishop of Rome to ever be called a pope. The very first. No other before. At least there. You see, pope, of course, derives from the Greek word papos, simply means father. It was primarily used in the Greek East for anyone who was a bishop as a title of respect. The very first time this word was used in a honorific sense as part of the official title of a bishop was not the Bishop of Rome. It was instead applied to the Bishop of Alexandria, referring specifically to a certain Pope, Heraclius by name, who held the bishopric of this prominent city of Egypt from 232 to 248. So if you want to be technical, the first bishop called a pope was the Bishop of Alexandria. Got it? Now, it was informally used by Marcellinus of Rome, 296 to 304, informally, but officially, it doesn't happen until Syria. So, hey, things are changing. Doesn't it seem like the medieval world's coming about slowly but surely? Are you seeing this? During the reign of Theodosius, it starts off almost like, ancient Rome, and now we're almost getting into the Middle Ages. You're going to see more of this in a little bit. By the way, of course, obviously, Sirius also declares himself, and I brought this up, as Pontifex Maximus at the same time. He's the same guy. So he's not only called himself a pope, he's calling himself a Pontifex Maximus. So it's just, so you see the papacy is changing big time once again during this period of time. He was one of the early ones to pope to issue decretals, and this is gonna be so controversy. Okay, case in point was Sirius decretal of 385, mandating all priests and presbyters to no longer live with their wives. It happened this late? Yeah. Happened now this is serious. Yeah, it is serious. Oh, sorry. So, yeah, so I don't want to read it. I actually have the whole letter in front of me talking about the fact that this should happen. Yeah, and it's a long letter, but if you want to read it afterwards, I'll read it to you. But this is when this starts. So before that means before this time, the priests were what? They were married. They had wives. Otherwise, you wouldn't have wives to be sent away in the first place. Is that making sense? We wouldn't have an edict saying they can't live with their wives if they didn't have wives in the first place. So this is all late. This is not early Christianity. Nobody seems to know this. I mean, they know this, but you never hear people talking about this. So there we go. Sirius also seriously attacked the Priscillian controversy, which would be, it's interesting, that'd be another talk in and of itself. They believed, these Priscillians believed in the cosmic battle between the forces of light empowered by the spirits of the 12 patriarchs and the forces of darkness animated by the spirits of the 12 zodiac. It's just an interesting belief. Of course, you had also a few other things. Although he went against them, he did not want them killed. He didn't go that far. However, he was described as unfriendly and haughty as a person. They're both Theodosius and the first and Sirius were associated with rebuilding St. Paul outside the walls. Next image. Oh, that's Symmachus. I talked about him just a few moments ago. That's that. Remember that great speech you just heard? Yeah, that's him. Look at him. Next image. This is Sirius. He's looking very serious. Next image. I choose this picture, old sketch of Paul outside the walls, because it burned down. A lot of it was destroyed, and they rebuilt it. And I just like to see the original version of it, what it looked like. But there's additions to it. But this was built by the two of them. There is a remaining pillar that still bears their name. So at least as early as 200 CE, there was a Cella Memoria that was dedicated to the Apostle Paul along the Via Ostia near the catacomb of Comedia. According to the Liber Pontificalis, the Emperor Constantine transformed the site into a grand church known as St. Paul outside the walls, but it was rebuilt in 386. The Emperor Theodosius dedicated an even greater ornate basilica. He filled it with elaborate mosaics, eventually 36 in all, displaying the life of the Apostle Paul. Various accounts inform us that the actual tomb of the Apostle Paul was once visible to all. Let's go to the next image. It's a little blurry there. It was supposedly found in 2002. And so you can visit today and hopefully maybe not as blurry. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Well, now, as we go along, in 386, trouble broke out between Ambrose and Valentinian II and Justina, again in Milan. I want you to mention that at the same time, I want to make sure that you know that you're still having the Northern Emperor still causing problems. So I just want you to, so he's still kind of bearing down on them. And yeah, so sorry, having technical difficulties here. Okay. But they still have the area around Rome. So, but they're going to retreat in a little bit. But right now there's tensions going out between Ambrose and Valentinian II and Justina. And so what happens in 386, the emperors gave the Arians the right to assemble and declare that its violators would be guilty of maiestas and liable to the death penalty, that they should have their own special church in Milan. They should be allowed to have it. And if Ambrose does not give them the church, then anybody who stops, including Ambrose, will get the death penalty. But Ambrose again refused to allow the Arians the use of church property. Valentinian issued a decree that exiled him. Ambrose replied that the emperor was within the church, not over it, and that in the matter of faith, the layman has no jurisdiction over the priest. And the sympathies of the people were again with him, and the Valentinian did not attempt to enforce a decree of exile. So once again, you're seeing another instance of church-state friction where, it's like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to exile you, and I'm going to leave you there. It's like, I'm staying here. What are you going to do? and there's nothing they can do. They can say whatever they want to say, but the power of the people is stronger, which is interesting. Now, in 386, also Theodosius I proclaimed in the Eastern Roman Empire that the care for pagan temples and pagan festivals were the exclusive prerogative of the pagans. So there is no more sponsorship that goes through the state whatsoever. Meanwhile, here we go. Maximus now is pushing forward. He's pushing south. He's already got Valentinian III kind of crowded. And so Valentinian now flees. And he flees. Valentinian II flees with mom. And they go to Theodosius I. Theodosius I agreed to give them refuge. But Justina wanted more than that, hoping that he would attack Maximus and put her son back on the throne. That's what she wants. So what is going to happen? What's going to happen is as follows. Well, she arrives, and she arrives with her daughter Galla. I know you don't think this is important, but it will be. I think there should be a book. There's a lot of women in politics in the late 4th century, because there's incredible influence of these powerful women that is looked over constantly by historians. That's why I'm going to the primary sources, because you hear these stories and yet you don't hardly hear about it in the schoolroom, right? But here you go. So she brings along daughter Galla. Remember, Theodosius was a widower. Do you remember this? Remember widower? Remember Aelia Flacilia died already. So what happens is this. Zosimus tells the story, and it goes as follows. Meanwhile, you're not going to hear this anywhere else, right? Meanwhile, Justina, who was a person of great experience and knew the best manner of conducting her affairs, understanding that Theodosius was naturally inclined to love, introduced into his presence her daughter Galla, who was extremely beautiful. Then, embracing the knees of the emperor, she supplicated with great humility that he would neither suffer the death of Gracian to pass unrevenged, to whom he owed the empire, nor them to remain neglected and destitute of every hope. As she spoke these words, she showed him her daughter, who was in tears, lamenting her misfortune. When Theodosius had listened to this supplication and had observed the beauty of Galla, his eyes discovered the wound she had inflicted on his heart. Yet he deferred that affair to a future occasion, and in the meantime gave them favorable hopes. Becoming daily more inflamed with the love of Galla, he requested Justina to grant him her daughter, since his former wife Placilia was dead. To this demand she replied that she would by no means accede to it unless he would make war on Maximus to avenge the death of Gracian. You're not marrying my daughter until you get my son back on the throne. The things we do for love. So, but here's the problem. Maximus has a superior position. I mean, he does. He has the resources. He now has all of the Western Roman Empire. It's his. It's like he has Rome. It's like, okay. And so it's kind of, even though Theodosius is strong, he's the reason why the Roman Empire is in two halves, because it's too big to manage. He needs to hold off the barbarians in his northern frontier. He needs to hold off the barbarians in the east, right? He needs to do that. Now he has to go over to the west. He's worried about his flank. Is that making sense? He's worried about, but so it is kind of a desperate situation. It's not a logical choice. But It's a matter of the heart. So, July of 388, Theodosius combined his troops with those of Valentinian II and invaded the Roman territories under Maximus. Maximus, however, was defeated at the Battle of Sab, which is quickly look at the image, surrounding Aquila, and was executed August 28th, 388. And maybe, yeah, there it is. There's Sab. And so defeat came about. Guess who got married? Yeah, you put that down, yeah. Yes, that's right. So Theodosius fulfilled his promise to Justina for the marriage to Galla, giving Valentinian II territories he lost to Maximus. So there you go. So Justina got a daughter married to Theodosius, son, emperor of the West. It's a pretty good deal, right? Maybe. I don't know. Well, okay. So what happened now? What happens now is that then after all of this, Justina dies. And because of that, Valentinian is like, I still know what I'm doing because she's been ruling, right? So what happens is Theodosius, he gets somebody to advise him. His name is Arbogast. That's really his name, Arbogast, Arbogast, Arbogast. Arbogast will become his advisor. And so there you have it. But Theodosius kind of remained in the Latin West for 3 years, making administrative changes as he did so. So there you go. The Senate again asked for the altar of victory to be placed back. And again, of course, he said no. And of course, obviously, he and Ambrose are the same viewpoint. There is a period of time when Symmachus is exiled, and that pagans again are being persecuted. But then eventually they're not persecuted. And Symmachus had many allies. And then later on, even Theodosius, he even promotes Symmachus to the position of consul in 391. So, hey, in fact, Symmachus wrote until the year 402. So there you have it. Well, Theodosius was out fighting against Maximus. Despite all the edicts of Theodosius I, the Arians were again gaining power, again in Constantinople, and because of the resentment towards the emperor and his policies against them, were waiting for an opportunity to work against him. And so the hopes were gained during this war of Maximus because they thought that Theodosius would lose and things would all be happily ever after. But that didn't happen. So you're going to see some ramifications there. So now what will happen is Maximus is, remember, when Maximus was around, Theodosius stopped persecuting pagans temporarily. Now that Maximus is dead, guess what? We're going to start persecuting them again. Yet at the same time, people like Symmachus and certain higher level pagans will not be part of this attack, if that makes any sense. Theodosius, interestingly enough, changed his views towards the Jewish community, and he proved very friendly towards the Jewish community. At first, he was a little more adverse. You probably heard about that earlier. In 388, he ordered the Jewish synagogue at Calindasium in Mesopotamia to be rebuilt, and he showed support for the Jewish community. Then again, hey, guess what? People just don't give up. Again, in 388, the Senate again begged the restoration of the altar of victory. I know, it just goes on like a broken record. Give it back. Nope. And then, of course, there was a barbarian incursion. And of course, yet another battle, which we're skipping. And by 390, Theodosius is getting himself pretty comfortable as a ruler. So let's go to the next image. Theodosius is finally kind of coming to his own. And so in 390, Theodosius removed an Egyptian obelisk dedicated to Thutmose III from 1479 to 1425 BCE. Originally located in Karnak, but moved to Alexandria by Constantius and brought to Constantinople. He positioned it directly in the center of the hippodrome, a pagan monument repurposed to suit an ascetic rather than a religious role, a mark of things to come. The base of the pedestal features Theodosius I offering the crown of victory to the winner in the chariot races as he stands between two Corinthian columns. Let's go to the next image, with arches beyond on either side. Also pictured were spectators, musicians, and dancers. Also, if you look carefully, you can make out the water organ, a Satibius. The pedestal's east side bears the following Latin inscription: "Though formerly I opposed resistance, I was ordered to obey the serene masters and to carry their palm. Once the tyrants have been overcome, all things yield to Theodosius and to his everlasting descendants. This is true of me too. I was mastered and overcome in 3 times 10 days and raised towards the upper air under the governor Proculus." So, yep. And then let's go to the next image. There's another inscription. It says, "This column with the 4 sides which lay on the earth, only the Emperor Theodosius dared lift it up against its burden. Proculus was invited to execute his order, and this great column stood up in 32 days. So you can see that Theodosius is starting to like himself a lot. Maybe just a little bit. The obelisk, let's go another one, next one. The obelisk also reveals a change in Roman art. Theodosius and the imperial family are separated from the nobles amongst the spectators in the imperial box, with a cover over them as marking their status. The naturalism of traditional Roman art in such scenes give way to these reliefs to conceptual art. The idea of order, decorum, and respective ranking expressed in serried ranks of faces. This is seen as evidence of formal themes beginning to oust the transitory details of mundane life. So you see there's lots of changes going on here. And then I got to tell you a story. So here we go. Look at me. The story of how Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, managed to humble the Roman Emperor Theodosius actually begins in an obscure tavern somewhere in the city of Thessalonica in 390. Here, according to early Christian historian Sozomen, amongst the noise of laughter and coarse bantering about, a certain popular charioteer, probably inebriated at the time, saw himself shamefully exposed, the source says, and attempted an outrage. You can guess what that would be, for which he was apprehended and put into custody. Whatever the sordid details, his subsequent imprisonment effectively put a damper on the general mood of a very sports-oriented populace, for which the throwing race at the local hippodrome had become their civic obsession. Imagine soccer in Italy, and you get the idea. In fact, disappointment eventually transformed into rage as the Thessalonians convinced themselves that this one charioteer was so fundamental for their celebrations that they simply could not go on. In their opinion, he had to be released, and he had to be released immediately. Suddenly, the people took to the streets, stoning local magistrates and attacking other public officials. After the ensuing riot, Buthericus, general of the troops of Illyria, was found dead. Outraged by their public crime, Theodosius interpreted this riot as a personal attack against his own authority and proceeded to order the death of thousands without the benefit of a trial. As another Christian historian by the name of Theodoret notes, multitudes were mowed down like ears of corn in harvest tide. It is estimated that as many as 7,000 perished in the incident. Sozomen adds that even strangers who had but just arrived in their journey to other lands were sacrificed with the others. There's another source that says they practiced decimation, that every 10th person was allowed to live, but they'd scoop out the eye with a spork so they can share what they witnessed. No matter what the source is, it's pretty bad. 7,000, that's a lot dead. Believing justice was served because this is just what Roman emperors do. That's just what they do. There's a problem. He believed he was merely acting in a manner following the expectations for a Roman head of state when possible sedition was detected. But there's a problem though, because earlier that year, he got sick. Now, it was the tradition of Roman emperors to be baptized on their deathbed. The reason why they're baptized on their deathbed is they're no longer accountable for any deeds they did as Roman emperor. But see, and so like Constantine, for example, he was baptized on his deathbed. Well, Theodosius got sick. He got so sick, he thought he was going to die, and he got baptized, and then he got better. Congratulations, you're officially a Christian, but you're under the church. Somehow, he didn't fully understand what that meant from a public perspective. So, he's a Christian, a baptized Christian, and he's an emperor. There's nothing wrong with this. And so Theodosius confidently marched into Milan and prepared to pray in the church as was customary. But when he approached the gates of the church edifice, he was suddenly met by Ambrose, who grabbed him. Let's go to this next image. Who grabbed his purple robes and declared to him, there's the church, there's the entryway. That'd be kind of cool. Oh, and that one too, but that's that's still the entryway. So the entering in the area. He may have been grabbed close to those columns there. So prepared to pray in the church. Okay, let's see. Ambrose grabbed his purple and declared to him and all those present, stand back. A man defiled by sin and with his hand imbrued in blood and justly shed is not worthy without repentance to enter without these sacred precincts or partake of the holy mysteries. Yet Ambrose did not stop there, but ventured into more controversial territory, broaching the question of ultimate authority. Peradventure, your imperial power prevents you from recognizing the sin, and the power stands in light of reason. We must, however, know how our nature passes away and is subject to death. We must know the ancestral dust form which we sprang to and which we're swiftly returning. We must not become, we must not, because we are bedazzled by the sheen of purple, fail to see the weakness of the body that it robes. You are a sovereign, sir, of men of like nature, of your own, and who are in truth your fellow slaves. For there is one Lord and sovereign of mankind, creator of the universe. With what eyes, then, will you look on the temple of our common Lord? With what feet will you tread that holy threshold? How will you stretch forth your hands, still dripping with the blood of unjust slaughter? How in such hands will you receive the all-holy body of the Lord? How will you, in your rage so unrighteously poured forth with so much blood, lift your lips to the precious blood? Be gone, he says. And okay, 7,000 people, I would probably be just a little bit mad too. Because from my perspective, that is indeed a massacre. So let's go to the next image. This is from within the church itself. I think it's interesting because it's early, but look how they show Jesus. It looks pretty Roman to me, right? And that's actually my photograph that I took a picture of. So it's my own within the church. The emperor, dumbfounded, paused to consider this bold declaration. But as Theodoret notes, Theodosius knew clearly what belonged to priests and what to emperors. Theodosius, unlike other Christian Roman emperors before him, was already baptized in the church. And so now Ambrose, standing between him and the church building, was also, through his bold rebuke, positioned himself as a representative of God, believed by both he and the emperor as the indisputable sovereign. As God's agent on earth in cases regarding ecclesiastical affairs, Ambrose made it clear he was the one in authority. Seeing he could not deny the accusation, Theodosius bowed in submission before the bishop's superior moral authority and returned to his palace weeping bitterly. Church over state. Welcome to the Middle Ages. It starts here. Does that make sense? This is where it starts. This is it. Everything's here. 8 months later, Ambrose still refused to forgive the emperor, and Theodosius was faced with the reality that not only was he going to miss the grand Christmas festival because of his error, this is a big deal for a sovereign to consider himself son of the church, but worse still, he even began to fear that just as the doors of the church were shut before him, so were the gates of heaven broken by Ambrose. Theodosius came to the bishop and fully underwent penance for his acts, humbly putting his purple robes aside and doing whatever was asked of him, for he now confessed his crimes against God. Theodosius, his act of submission before Ambrose, was a quintessential turning point in his reign, and this resulted in the extension of church's influence in decisions of state as well. So here we go. Here we go. So what's going to happen now is that let's look at me, and well, actually, before you do that, I want to show you two more pictures. There's another place called San Ambroglia in Milan, and I just want to tell you, you can meet Ambrose there. So let's go to the next. These are my photos. Next picture. That's Ambrose in the middle right there. That's a skeleton. And the mitre on his head right there, and there's a close-up. So, yeah. So you can meet somebody who's very historical and just see a skeleton right there in the middle of the church. So yeah, thank you for showing that, Margie. All right. So you have this idea of Pontifex Maximus, head of the Roman religion, right? Head of the Roman religion. Under Constantine, you could be Pontifex Maximus, be head of the Roman religion that's inclusive of Christianity as well as paganism. Got it? Because Constantine is not a baptized Christian. But here's the problem. With Ambrose now in charge, got it? See how this works? He basically, it's the idea that Theodosius is now a Christian. How can a Christian be in charge of a pagan religion? See how that works? He can't be in charge of pagan religion. He has to be only in charge of a Christian religion because he's a Christian. He can't be inclusive because Christianity is exclusive. And so as a result of that, for you to be an obedient citizen who follows the emperor, you have to be part of the same belief system as he is and serve the same master. And he can't use any money, because now church and state's mixed together, for anything that's pagan related. Therefore, it'd be like he's paying for pagan beliefs and perspectives. Now that makes sense. So he tried at first to go, well, you guys are on your own, self-financing, But now, basically, the best way I can put it is, and you get this from the sources, he's broken. Does that make sense? He's broken. Ambrose broke him. He's now a puppet in many ways. It really is. And he's going to start having health issues too. He's now a broken puppet of Ambrose because the problem is perception, the surrounding perceptions against him. He has to follow suit, right? Now that there's more and more, and what will lead to is pretty bad. Here we go. So one of the issues that now arose concerned the government's support of paganism. Immediately, funds from the Roman public treasury ceased to go to the maintenance of pagan altars. But the changes did not stop there, for new questions began to circulate regarding the extent of imperial jurisdiction in respect to religious issues, with Ambrose fanning the flames as best as he could. The thought occurred to Theodosius that if he, as emperor, was indeed both head of the Roman state and a devoted Christian under the moral authority of the church, how could he, through his authority, support a belief system that was not his own? Ambrose is ready with the answers, and the fact was already set a precedent, of course, as we know, with that old altar of victory. You think that maybe in the middle of the night, because they ask so often, they kind of sneak it in like, put the wings, yeah. Anyway, but since the reign of Augustus, of course, as we know, Ambrose also knew he had succeeded in finding a Christian emperor in the person of Theodosius, willing to take the next step and recognizing the church's moral authority as applying in totality to imperial decision making. As a result, Theodosius in 391 declared the official end of all public observances of paganism. 391, an edict admittedly enforced more in the Greek eastern half of the Roman Empire than in Rome in the Latin West, but it is an edict. There it is. Okay. Now, blood sacrifices were strictly forbidden with this edict, where he states no one is to go to the sanctuaries, walk through the temples, or raise his eyes to statues created by the labor of man. No person shall pollute himself with sacrificial animals. No person shall slaughter an innocent victim. No person shall approach the shrines, shall wander through the temples, or revere the images formed by mortal labor, lest he become guilty by divine and human laws. Let's go to this image. This picture says 1,000 words. Talk about a picture that says 1,000 words. I think this says it all. You see what the result of this kind of attitude is. There it is. So what they'll do is they will destroy these gods and these goddesses. They will chisel a cross on the forehead, and they'll chip off its nose. That's an intentional one, by the way. That's not accidental. You can see we're just lopped off right there. Under the influence of Theodosius I, Valentinian also issued an edict that made it illegal to enter temples and to perform sacrifices there. The reaction against this law was strong in the Latin West, but not to back down. A second edict quickly followed, stating that all temples were officially closed down, as articulated in the Theodosian Code. The edicts against paganism by Theodosius I included as follows: no one shall consult a soothsayer, astrologer, or diviner. The perverse pronouncements of augurs and seers must fall silent. The universal curiosity about divination must be silent forever. Whosoever refuses obedience to this command shall suffer the penalty of death and be laid low by the avenging sword, unquote. From Codex Theodonicus, section 9:16, if you want to know exactly where it is. Pretty bad. Whatever privileges have been allowed under the ancient law to priests, ministers, prefects, and hierophants of the pagan cults, whether known by these or other names, are to be entirely abolished, nor should they pride themselves on being protected by any privilege, since their profession is known to be condemned by law. The knowledge of those who, being equipped with magic arts, are discovered to have plotted against men's lives and who have perverted modest minds with lust must be punished, and the penalty rightly exalted under the harshest of laws. There's also whoever should consider that those who serve the most sacred law may be forced into celebrating the rites of alien superstition. If a certain person does that, he shall be beaten with clubs in public, provided his status so permits. Lest superstition cease, he continues, let the madness of sacrifices be exterminated. For if anyone should dare to celebrate sacrifices in violation of the law of our Father, the deified emperor, and of this decree of our clemency, let an appropriate punishment and sentence immediately be inflicted on him. That's from the Codex Theodosius, but the deified emperor, interesting turn of phrase, and seems to be a contradiction of ideas, right? Let's go to the next image. This is an interesting woodcut. In decree that in all places, in all cities, the pagan temples should be closed at once. We decree also that we shall cease from making sacrifices. If anyone has committed such a crime, let him be stricken with the avenging sword. It says avenging sword quite often. Let temples in the countryside be demolished without disturbance or upheaval, with their overthrow and removal of all material basis for superstition will be destroyed. So they're trying to weed out the superstition of the countryside. So there you have that. In 391, next image, the celebrated Order of the Vestal Virgins was disbanded. The eternal flame of Rome extinguished. Next image. And the temple dedicated to Vesta closed down. This is what it used to look like. All public funding of any pagan temples were to be discontinued. The next image. Immediately, the temple of Zeus at Olympia was closed down as a result of the edict of Theodosius I in 391. Next image. As for the statue of Zeus at Olympia, which has been there forever, what's going to happen to that? It's going to eventually end up in Constantinople in 408 to enter into a museum of Lausus, located in the middle of the city next to the Hippodrome. This was destroyed by fire in 475 CE, but this statue of Zeus directly influenced images of God in Christ Pantocrator, as we know from primary sources. But is it all this? Well, I want to talk a little bit. Thank you, Margie. I want to tell you a few more stories here. But there is, in 391, it's the irony of Symmachus. Remember that pagan who made that wonderful speech? He's consul at this time when this is all happening. And yet he's not being attacked, which is interesting. Theodosius visited Rome briefly and made reforms there. But there is a very interesting story as told by Socrates Scholasticus. And it goes as follows, of a positive reform. The Emperor Theodosius, during his short stay in Italy, conferred the greatest benefit on the city of Rome by grants on the one hand and abrogations on the other. His largesse was indeed very generous, and he removed two most infamous abuses which existed in the city. One of them was the following. There were buildings of immense magnitude erected in ancient Rome in former times, in which bread was made for distribution amongst the people. Have you ever wondered, bread in circuses? Somebody's going to make that bread, right? Well, they built these enormous buildings that were granaries, but were also used to bake all this bread. Those who had the charge of these edifices, the manicips, were called in the Latin language, in process of time, converted them, this is so interesting, into receptacles for thieves. Now, as the bake houses in these structures were placed underneath, they built taverns at the side of each. So, where they kept prostitutes, by which means they entrapped many of those who went there either for the sake of refreshment or to gratify their lusts. So let's get this straight. So you have these huge monumental buildings, and the area of the bakeries, they're at the very bottom, got it? But in front of it, they have these taverns and barns all along the edge, full of prostitutes. So what's going to happen? Well, guess what? By which means they entrap many for the sake or to gratify their lust. For by a certain mechanism, contrivance, they precipitated them from the tavern into the bakehouse below. So basically, the guy goes to be with the prostitute, and there's some kind of mechanism where all of a sudden it goes, and he shoots, he goes, whoa, and he goes down below into the bakery. And then it closes up after him. This was practiced chiefly upon strangers, and such as were in this way kidnapped were compelled to work in the bakehouses, where many of them were immured until old age, not being allowed to go out, and giving the impression to their friends that they were dead. It happened that one of the soldiers of the Emperor Theodosius fell into the snare, who, being shut up in the bakehouse and hindered from going out, drew a dagger which he wore and killed those who stood in the way. The rest, being terrified, suffered and then he escaped. When the emperor was made acquainted with the circumstances, he punished it and ordered these haunts of lawless and abandoned characters to be pulled down. So there you have it. So interesting stuff, little side story. Well, the next year, you're thinking you can't go any further. And this is, okay, here's one thing to say: it's illegal for you to practice paganism. In 392, Theodosius proceeded further, going as far as forbidding all private observances of paganism too. You could no longer privately worship the gods. And so he made a de facto state. In a sense, the state was no longer out there. It's now dictating what you do within your own home. Does that make sense? Now, of course, you're going to have more mess, because according to Socrates, Scholasticus, there's a certain Theophilus. Let's go to the next image. It probably will be blurry. Let's see, but maybe not. Yeah, and there was Theophilus of Alexandria as the patriarch of the city of Alexandria from 385 to 412. And of course, what's going to happen here is next image was the destruction of the temple of Serapis. And so this was an absolutely magnificent temple, considered very sacred. However, of course, Rufinus says, however, a brief had been spread abroad by the Gentiles themselves that if a human hand was laid violently on the statue, the earth would immediately open up when it comes to the image of Serapis, dissolving into chaos. One of the soldiers, better protected by his face than by his weapons, seized a double-edged axe, stood up, and with all his strength struck the jaw of the old man. And so they destroy the temple of Serapis, which is beautiful. Go to the next image. And that's all that's left of it today. It was indeed one of the wonders, but it is no longer there. It is demolished. They did find below a bunch of ankhs, and they thought to themselves that this was a symbol of the cross. But there's one last story, and what's going to happen here is I'll go into, oh, by the way, the last of the, see me for a little bit, the last of the Olympic Games were over, and so the last Olympics was 393. But since Olympics is connected to paganism, it was also then ended. There was also, of course, meanwhile, Sirius is having battles with various people because many are denying the perpetual virginity of the Virgin Mary. And so all this is going on during this period of time. And then something happens. And that is, Valentinus the second dies. So what's going to happen here, I'm going to tell you this one story, and then I'll wrap up things. But we do have to hear this story, and then let's go to the next image. This is going to be, this is the big one here. What's going to happen is there's always hope. And so what happened is this: before he died, meanwhile, there was this man. His name is Eugenius. Eugenius is a man of learning. He was a professor and a teacher of rhetoric. He was a grammarian. He taught the Latin language, and he was appointed to service at the palace. He is perfect. A guy by the name of Arbogastes thought he would become a great emperor. And so he's perfect. You know, he's favorable towards paganism. He's favorable towards toleration. He stands against these times of persecution and bloodshed. He's going to change things around. And so he, with Eugenius, they proceed to Vienne, a town in Gaul, where Valentinian II resided. And what happens is that they find the Valentinian II. It says he was amusing himself near the town in some sports with the soldiers, and they apprehended him. It was not terribly difficult. Abragastes gave him a mortal wound, and as soon as he had performed this action, he declared Eugenius emperor. Eugenius was the one in favor of restoring the old order. This is the last pagan gasp, the last moment. Now, when the events related to Theodosius, his wife Galla filled the whole court with confusion by her lamentations for the death of her brother. The emperor likewise was overcome by grief and anxiety, having not only lost his associate in the empire, who was a young man, says Zosimus, but the empire having fallen into the hands of men disaffected to himself and likewise invisible. He also recognized, according to Zosimus, that Arbogastes was very brave and skillful, and Eugenius was learned and virtuous. He knew that these men were good and worthy as succeeding him. And so an embassy arrived from Eugenius to learn from the Emperor Theodosius whether he would acknowledge the title of Eugenius or declare his election void. And what will happen, of course, is you can understand that his wife is not going to have any of this. And as a result, there is going to be war. Go to the next image. And thus he made his choice of his principal officers. He was hastened to march. And meanwhile, when his wife Galla was delivered of an infant, but no sooner eased of her burden than deprived of life. So right in the middle of all this, his wife has a baby, but she dies in the middle of this. He's filled with grief. And it looked as if, this is, of course, the great battle that comes, the Battle of Frigidus. It looked as if Theodosius was going to lose. Absolutely. We could take this down. The war against Eugenius was more than a political battle. It was a struggle for the survival and protection of a way of life. For had Eugenius won, paganism would have continued to be tolerated, yet that was not what happened. When Theodosius passed through Rome and met with the Senate, hoping to convert them to Christianity, the Senate refused. They completely refused. In fact, every single one of them refused to convert to Christianity. Everyone. And you know where they're going to go. So what's going to happen? So he judges most prudent that he went to war. As he arrived there, consequently, was under the necessity of engaging. He judged it most prudent to place the barbarian troops in front and expose them first. But then, of course, when the two armies were engaged, there was an eclipse of the sun happened that for more than half the time of the action appeared rather to be night than day. As they fought, therefore, a kind of nocturnal battle, so great a slaughter was made that the same day the greater part of the allies of Theodosius were slain. His side lost because of the eclipse. Now, under an ancient understanding, reckoning, looking at signs' importance, that would mean who's favorable from the gods' perspective. It would be Eugenius. Does that make sense? The result of the first day was in victory for Eugenius, and many believed the battle was over for Theodosius. When night came on and the armies had rallied, Eugenius was elated with his victory, that he distributed money amongst those who had behaved with great gallantry during the battle and gave them time to refresh themselves as if that they needed to have some sort of celebration. But in the middle of the night, Theodosius was visited by two heavenly riders in white, supposedly, who encouraged the emperor to continue the fight and so attacked the next day. The battle the next day was a close one, with Eugenius looking at it as if the advantage over the Theodosian barbarian auxiliaries also looked like that Eugenius is going to win again. Again, a supernatural event is claimed wherein the army of Theodosius were aided now by nature via cyclonic winds known as the Bora, which blew directly in the faces of the enemy, giving Theodosius an advantage. And of course, eventually, Eugenius was defeated. When they had got him in their power, they cut off his head and carried it on a long spear around the camp in order to show those who still adhered to him that it was now their interest to be reconciled to the emperor, inasmuch as a usurper was removed. And so here we come. And so it's yeah. Okay, so now, but because of all this, Theodosius' health was broken down. He was getting very sickly. He knew he was going to die. Let's go to the next image. So he sends for his son Honorius. This is my picture of Theodosius in front of San Lorenzo in Milan. Next image. There's a good image of Theodosius, a coin. And so what's going to happen, next image, is his son Honorius will become Roman emperor of the Latin West from 395 to 423. Next image. His other son Arcadius will become Roman emperor of the East from 395 to 408. And the Roman Empire will never again be reunited. Go to the next image. What will happen is the western half honor Honorius. It will fall in 476. But by that point, there's little fight left in it. A Romulus Augustulus, a teenage kid, was retired to a place in Cappadocia with a pension. And that was the end of the last Roman emperor because they had no heart left. The barbarians had taken over the entire West. And by the way, they were all Arian barbarian, of the Arian brand of belief system. That will have a ramification, of course, because the Visigoths in Spain were Arian and persecuted the Nicene Christians constantly, to the point where, once again, in 711, when the Muslims crossed over, those Romans under the Visigoths hated the Visigoths so much that they, with the Muslims, destroyed the Visigoths, and that's how the Muslims took over Spain. So it does have historical precedence. Meanwhile, the eastern section will continue until 1453, but it will still have a very strong central Christian governance. Maybe. Okay, let's see my face. So of course, the result of this division by Theodosius will now define the Latin medieval West, which will eventually, there will be with the Pope as the most powerful figure. Well, you got to remember, the Pope becomes that most powerful figure in the West during the reign of Theodosius, right? You saw that. You saw it happen during that time. And of course, he will hold that power. It will be church over state until we get to old Henry VIII, right? Let's see how that works. So that's how that works in the West. In the East, you have, of course, everything is under the emperor until 1453. With that said, the ancient pagan knowledge continues on. In fact, it's fascinating because of the back door within the intellectual classes, that being Platonism, now being Neoplatonism. What happens is that the intellectual set is very much involved in Neoplatonic mystical thought, and many of them do preserve these ancient belief systems. And in many cases, there are some ideas or perspectives that may lead us to believe that many of them had certain inclinations. That's what's happening in the East. So even though you had a strong sense of a monolithic form of Christianity, there are qualifications with that. But what else happens? The other thing that happens is this, is that people don't change their beliefs overnight. What happens is that we are creatures of habit. We don't like to have change happen. We want to continue worshiping the same way. So what happens at Ephesus is that people are worshiping Artemis of the Ephesians. And then what happens is Mary, the virgin goddess, right? Sorry. What happens is Mary, who is mother of God, has so many similar features to Artemis. In fact, some of those features were added on as a result of the Council of Ephesus in the year 431. And as a result of that, you have this synchronistic type of Virgin Mary that will become acceptable to many of those who are of the pagan persuasion. At the same time, many of the gods and goddesses will just slip over and become saints. And many of the procedures and the way they do their worship, all they will do is they'll have the same kind of altars, but what they'll do is they'll just put a cross there, and they'll have it arranged the same way. People really don't change, and they also don't change how they view this new Christian God in many ways, especially in the countryside. There is this idea where Christianity really does freely mix with indigenous beliefs, to the point where by the time you get to the 500s, many of the popes of Rome just give up and just let the synchronized kind of belief system meld together. And we see that as a result of our holidays today. So yes, while official paganism in an overt sense is over, it is technically under Theodosius. In reality, it continues on because it's part of culture as much as religion. It permeates into their heritage, into their understandings of who they are, into family, into their virtues. It is intrinsically a part of them. And so in many cases, it just continues on. But what about Theodosius? How does history judge him? I think we should be the judge, right? And how does what happened then relate to today? I would just say a few very quick takeaways. The big one is this: never have church and state as one. Religion has no place officially being a part of politics in the institutionalized way. Because when that happens, anything outside of that religion becomes an opponent. And that goes against the freedoms of everybody as seen as equals. That's my takeaway. And what we see here is an example of that. Let us not have that happen again. Thank you.